Okay, good evening. The August 15th session of the Zoning Board of Adjustment for the City of Portsmouth is in session. Welcome. Just a few things to go over this evening that, due to the large volume of our agenda, can you hear me? Okay, no. Really? Okay, I will speak up. Due to the large volume on our agenda, we've broken the meeting into two meetings. The second meeting will be the 22nd, next Tuesday. The items that have been moved to the 22nd are the request of the Islamic Society of the Seacoast area for property at 868 Maplewood Avenue. And number two, the request of Karen Nicola and Karen Nicola Trustee for property located at 281 Cabot Street. The request of NovoCure Inc. for property located at 64 Vaughn Street. Number four, the request of Cynthia Austin Smith and Peter Smith, owners, for property at 9 Kent Street. And the request of Caleb E. Ginsberg and Samantha L. Ginsberg for property located at 303 Bartlett Street. The other item of business before we get started is that there has been a request to postpone to September from 30 Parker Street. So if someone would like to make a motion to suspend the rules so we can vote on this, Paul?
Make a motion to suspend the rules?
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay. Now we need a motion to,
Madam Chairman,
yes, Paul.
make a motion to postpone item F for 30 Parker Street
To,
to the September meeting.
yes. Is there a second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No,
You want to roll? Yeah.
is there no discussion?
I'm sorry. Yes, you can discuss. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will vote in favor of this, but as I've indicated in the past, the excuse that I couldn't get my project done in 2 years because of COVID is starting to wear pretty thin in my mind.
This is for 30 Parker Street.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Now we know what you feel about the other one.
Yeah. Okay, well, that was a little dull.
Yeah, sorry.
But is there anybody else who would like to discuss it before we vote on it?
No.
Okay. All right. Then all in favor of postponing this to the September meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay. Thank you. All right. We have not seen the minutes. Is that what we have? You said there wasn't access.
You have the minutes in the packet that was available as of yesterday. If you feel like you need more time to review, you can.
Has everyone been able
Take more
to see
time.
the minutes because of a technical glitch? If you would like, we can vote for them at the next meeting, or we're all good.
I'm fine.
I'm good.
Okay. So we need a motion to approve the minutes of the July 18th, 2023 meeting. Paul?
Madam Chairman, I move to approve the July 18th, 2023 meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion?
I just have a correction.
Sure.
Okay. This one I am certain that I'm actually on the right item for. So on the July 18th meeting minutes on the first page, under Roman numeral, well, the first Roman numeral I, vote to appoint temporary chair and vice chair. It indicates the motion passed by a vote of 5-1. With Mr. Rossi abstaining, I believe that would make it a 5-0 vote with Mr. Rossi abstaining. That was my only comment. That and the Roman numerals probably need to be adjusted because there's two number ones.
Okay. Do you accept that amendment?
No problem.
If there's no further discussion, then all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Who was
Abstain.
the second on that? Sorry.
Tom
Okay.
was the second.
And
And one abstention. Approval of the July 25th, 2023 minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tom. And discussion on these? Okay, then, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? No. Okay, they are approved. The first item of business is Item A in old business. And this is Ashley Dickinson and Elise Hambacher of 125 Elwyn Avenue, who request a one-year extension to the variance granted November 16th of 2021. What would we like to do with this? Paul?
I'll make the motion to grant the variance for 1 year to November 16th, 2023.
Okay, is there a second?
I would just say second, but it's a second, and it would be to November 16th, 2024.
2024.
It's an extension, not a
Thank you.
variance.
No. Okay. Is there any discussion on this? Okay, ahead.
Madam Chair. This I'm in the right location. Sorry,
That's fine.
I was so prepared to talk to this before. I just got way too excited. Yeah. So again, I will support the motion to extend. However, the applicants, part of what they're saying is the impacts of COVID-19. Again, once upon a time, you were only allowed 1 year to get your building permit. The law was changed to allow 2 years, and the applicant didn't get it done in 2 years, and now is asking for a third year. I really think we need to be careful about making those automatic extensions. I am supportive in this case, but it's just, I think the reasoning needs to be more and more sophisticated as time goes along to make sure that we're not just, granting these as a course of action. That's all. Thank you.
What is I have a question, if I may. What is the perceived danger of allowing an extension?
So you're granted 2 years by right. The third year is by careful consideration of the board. It should be something that is associated with a unique set of circumstances. Like we did see one where the applicant got involved with a legal matter that really derailed everything that they were doing. That is a reason to grant an extension, at least in my mind, and every board member can consider it one way or the other. Just from my perspective, you're given 2 years, which is pretty generous, to go and get a building permit for your relief that's been granted. I just think that the surrounding neighbors, everybody, the city at large, all has an expectation that you will carry that out, and if you fail to carry that out, then you lose the privilege that you were granted here at this board through getting a variance or a special exception, the case may be.
Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay. Then, all in favor to allow the postponement, extension?
Aye.
Who? Yes.
Is
wanna
that-
vote,
is that how we're doing it, or?
I'm just doing a voice vote.
Okay, aye.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, now we'll get serious. And I understand some people in the public are having trouble hearing us, so if we could be a little more cognizant of that, that might be helpful. Let us know. So the first item of business in new business is a request from Alexandra Scott and Scott Scott, owners for property located at 271 Sagamore Avenue, whereas relief is needed to demolish the existing detached garage and construct an addition with attached garage, which requires the following. 1, variance from section 10.521 to allow A, 0.5-foot, 6-inch right yard where 10 is required, and B, 28% building coverage where 25% is the maximum. Said property is located on Assessor Map 221, Lot 15, and lies within the General Residence A District. Is there anyone to speak to this petition?
Good evening. My name is Amy Dutton. I live in Portsmouth and work out of Kittery. I'm here representing Mrs. Scott, and Allie is at home with the kids. Just a little overview of the project. The existing house is a New Englander that is single-family dwelling and was purchased by Allie and Scott in August of 21. They owned a home in the New Franklin School District that was much smaller. So they rented that out, and then recently, like I think in April, right? In order to fund the construction of this project. They just welcomed their third child, and while we have been designing this, they've renovated actually that's an older picture, so now the front porch is new. They've cleaned it out. It was a really dilapidated home. So at this point, the goal is to bring the house back to life and create a home for their 3 girls to grow up in and call their family home for the 5 of them, and as well as both of their sets of parents live away. So in order to accomplish this, we are proposing that the existing garage will be removed, as well as a room off the back of the house that is kind of falling off. That will be removed, and the new addition will accommodate a dining room, family room on the first floor, primary suite and a laundry on the second, and then a girls' bedroom on the third floor. The house will be connected through a mudroom or the room of doors, directing people in and out through a small mudroom that you can see there. It's just a narrow 6-foot room, and then connecting that to a 2-story garage. Above the garage will be an office. Ally works at home 100%, and then as an overflow guest room. So that's sort of the overall scope of the project. In addressing the 5 criteria, per section 10.233.21, the variance will not be contrary to public interest. Sagamore is one of those very highly traveled roads connecting Rye and Portsmouth, as we all know. It also gets a lot of foot traffic, so I believe that this will be a nice improvement to the neighborhood. Per section 10.233.22, the spirit of the ordinance will be observed. This project is in line with the other projects on the street with renovated houses and attached garages. As depicted in this proposal, you can see if you walked by that both houses on each side have been beautifully renovated with similar scope of project. Per section 10.233.23, substantial justice will be done. We can create as a much more functional outdoor space. By right now, it's very awkward that the house is located so far away from the garage. Pulling the garage up away from the back property line allows, and attaching it to the house will allow for a more contained space in the back area for the kids to play and kind of contain them away from Sagamore. And per 10.233.24, the value of the surrounding properties will not be diminished. This project does directly impact the values of 261 and 281 Sagamore. I probably right now we're devaluing their homes, so I think that everybody would like this to everybody get on the same level there as far as home values. And per section 10.233.25, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in hardship. The first thing I want to point out is most of the properties in the neighborhoods are non-conforming lots. Staying in line with all the setbacks would be very difficult, if not impossible, to accomplish our goal without a variance on this project. The second is the property lines have changed since the abutter had their survey completed on the right side as you're facing the house. That's 261? 261, there was a lot line adjustment from them, but we are using MapGeo. So I have to say it's 9 inches from the property line, but it's probably more. we did not have that resurveyed because it had already been surveyed. Those 2 points had already been surveyed. So we're staying with the 9 inches that MapGeo shows us. And lastly, not granting this relief would result in hardship consistent with the surrounding properties. So I urge you to consider a variance for this project, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Ram.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So going back to what you just sort of touched on, I'm still kind of confused. So you talk about this property line adjustment. What exactly took place, and why was there an adjustment toward the neighboring property?
Do you know how to answer this a little bit better than I do?
Yeah, so the neighbor to the right.
Excuse me, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Scott Scott. I'm the owner of 271 Sagamore. Yeah, so the owner to the right, it was a multifamily originally, and they demoed it completely. And there was a survey done before the demo, and then after the construction had been done, there was another survey done and completed, and that did change the lines between ours 271 and his 261. That wasn't our survey, that was his, but I do know for a fact that now I have a pin in my driveway that wasn't there originally. Before, it was running from the telephone pole at the corner to the back fence, and that's shifted over about a foot or two to the left, but it's not a straight line. It's sort of, I don't know, 35-degree line to the back of the lot. It's about as much as I can explain there.
Okay. But you have nothing in your application reflects what the actual property line is, because you're abutting awfully close to the said property line, so,
Yeah, that's correct, yep.
okay.
Yeah, the garage itself, the way it sits now, or even before that, even before that survey was done, was on it practically.
Okay. Looking at your drawing, and I don't know who wants to answer this question. Looking at your drawing A14, which is on page 40 of our packets, I guess this is sort of the essence of my concerns with this project is that you are taking a garage that is, pretty small. You're showing here at about 12 feet, and you're expanding it up to 25, 26-ish plus feet in height. So that, again, is right along a property line that also has some questions associated with it. Maybe it's in your favor, maybe not. I, don't have that full information. So I guess two aspects to my concern. One is what is the reason for needing that extra height? And secondly, why do you feel that that is not a negative impact on your neighbor's property? I do believe there's some structure that's not too far away from that, but maybe if you could explain that a little bit better.
Twofold. One is because the lot's so narrow, obviously, and going vertical was the solution to getting them more square footage. So that space will be the office and the guest bathroom above the garage. That neighbor does support the project. I don't know if he wrote a letter in.
The only structure, well, and the most important one, is his home. There's no shed or anything on his line over there. He does have a side porch and a patio, but otherwise there's, it's the home that is to the right of that. He does support it. I do not have anything to reflect that tonight, like a letter or anything like that, but I've spoken to him, and he's for it for the sense that he's going to be fencing in his backyard, and he just sees that as, that's a wall anyway to him.
Okay. And all right. And then is there a plan to reuse any of the existing foundation of that current garage, or is that completely just getting ripped out and a new foundation is being
I
put in?
wouldn't even call it a foundation the way it sits. It's practically stone, like just crushed stone.
And going to drawing A6 on your, which is on page 37 of our packet. So proposed second floor, I know you mentioned an office for that space, but there's also here it's listed as future bedroom over garage, and the office is in fact listed as being on the second floor and sort of that more hallway space. I guess what is the plan? I'm just trying to understand. It seems to be contradicting what you just told us.
That space over the garage is really, it can be an office. Ally will use that as her office because it's separated from the house. The office that's by the back staircase is really probably for the girls to do their homework, and it's just a desk in a hall.
It's a hallway, so if you take that, if you come up that first set of stairs there, and you take a left, that actually leads you right now to a walk-up attic staircase that's probably 3.5 feet wide. I mean, it's not to code or anything. So our idea actually was to it's just an elongated hallway to lead you to the next staircase up to the attic. That space will not really be space used, honestly.
Okay. And segueing up to the attic, if I may continue, Madam Chair. Segueing up to the attic, sheet A7, which is page 38 on our packet, you do have sort of a space. You have a girl's bedroom towards the new addition on the back, but the front portion, which is dormered out as well. What is the intent of that space?
The bathroom is on that front part for the dormer, and then just playroom, flop space, hangout area. I mean, they'll be sharing that bedroom up there, so sort of trundles or bunk beds on either side, their own separate closet, and then sharing a bathroom, and then their own little hangout area. So the third floor essentially being theirs.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I realize that even if you removed the connector area and had the garage directly as an addition, it would still be within the 10-foot setback, but it would be closer to being conforming. And I was wondering if you looked into that as a design option.
You did. And in my mind, what I was looking at was roof lines. And I felt massively, like if you were to remove the mudroom that's single story and just add on the garage, it not only became a roof line little bit of a nightmare, but dense, if we use that word. I think this board is okay with it, but HDC is not. But in that design element of not creating something just so big. And
we're just back to the garage. If we had just taken that garage as is and pulled it up and put that mudroom, in between it, we wouldn't even be asking for any variance. But because we're pulling it up and widening and heightening, I mean, that's the reason we're here. Otherwise, where the garage sits now, that we're really trying to make it so that it's all one piece and that there's a backyard and a front yard, really. Right now, it's just jumbled, and that space in between the garage and house we use for parking, but with the garage now, we'd also use that, to at least store one vehicle.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Anyone in favor? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? Is there anyone who would like to speak for, or against? For, or against? Okay, if not, then the public hearing is closed. Okay.
I would like to make a motion to approve the variance as presented and advertised.
Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Mantle. Okay, Mr. Rossi.
It is within the public interest to support and grow the housing stock suitable for families in Portsmouth, and therefore granting this variance would not be contrary to the public interest as it achieves that purpose. Granting the variance would do substantial justice in that there is no loss to the public by allowing this project to proceed. Granting the variance would not diminish the value of the surrounding properties. I fall back again to the fact that this has been advertised. There's been no objection from the abutters. I think that they're creating a little bit of extra room behind them for the properties on Broad Street, and I believe that overall, net-net, they are actually enhancing the values of the surrounding properties. With regard to unnecessary hardship, granting this variance and allowing this project to proceed would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The houses that are adjacent to it are similarly of similar massing to what is proposed in this project, and the design absolutely is in keeping with what you see along particularly the renovated homes on Sagamore Avenue.
Thank you. Would you like to add?
Yes, I agree with Mr. Rossi's statement. It looks like the house on either side of the applicant's house have already had generous renovations done. So, as he said, this would be in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Mr. Ram?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will not be supporting the motion. I think that what's being asked for here, maybe from a total massing standpoint, I actually still think it's a little bit much, but may not be egregious, but it's still, less than a foot, perhaps more, but we don't know, off of an adjacent property line, and right up, which is pretty close to a neighbor's property. I mean, we're severely expanding the nature of the construction that's along that side of the property. I would be willing for some relief, but relief all the way out to that extent with a very tall garage, really in addition to the house in essence, that is even further dormered on that side of the house, of the garage portion of the house. I just think it's way too much of an ask. Maybe the abutters are okay with it. I don't. Again, this isn't our job here. Isn't to justify things by who feels okay about what or not about okay what. It really comes down to our criteria, and I just can't see where there's unique hardship about this property. I agree it's a narrow lot, but what they're asking for out of that narrow lot is very, very extensive, is very imposing upon the fundamental thing that we're looking for in our zoning ordinance with regard to setbacks, which is light and air, by creating this very large new addition right up against the property line. I think we just, as a board, need to be very careful about it. I understand the trend in Portsmouth is, once upon a time you would have sought a bigger house if you needed more room. Now the idea is to max out every available square inch of your property and build it up as high as you can. Well, that really is, I think, fundamentally going to start changing the character of a lot of our neighborhoods. We need to be very careful with it. In this particular application, I think that what is being asked for is beyond the bounds of what I'm willing to say our criteria allow us to approve. So I'm not.
Any further discussion? I would like to say that I am going to support this, and it is a large addition, but the ask is so small. The percentage of coverage is 3%, and the change on the right yard is 1/4 foot, if we can be accurate with that. I'm not sure, but and therefore I will vote in favor of this petition. Anybody else? I just want to ask that should we put something in there that says a foot plus or minus because of the problem with the survey?
The application was advertised as 9 inches.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, as 1/2 foot.
1/2 foot, yeah.
We rounded down to be conservative. If the as-built plans or the proposal, when it goes through for a building permit, is larger than that, that is permissible.
Okay.
Because it would be not more
Conforming.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So the motion is to approve, a yes vote approves the project on Sagamore Avenue. Mr. Mantle? We're not having our alternate, are we? Is Jody sitting?
7.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I was thinking that. Okay, Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mantle?
Yes.
Ms. Margison?
No.
Mr. Ram?
No.
Mr. Rossi?
Yes.
And Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And I vote yes, the petition is passed. I'm sorry, Ms. Record. And you'll be in for all of them tonight.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, the next item of business, and you can see that Mr. Bayham has recused himself for this vote. And I was remiss. I just want to remind the presenters, the petitioners, that you are permitted 15 minutes. And if you think your plea, your discussion will take longer, please ask us ahead of time, and we'll vote to give you some more time. Okay? All right. This is item B, the request of Tanner Family Revocable Trust, owners for property located at 380 Greenleaf Avenue, whereas relief is needed to construct a detached garage, which requires a variance from section 10.571 to allow an accessory structure to be located closer to a street than the principal building. Said property is located on Assessor Map 243, Lot 63, and lies within the single residence district. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Allison Tanner. My husband and I are the resident owners of 380 Greenleaf Avenue. The property is about 1.14 acres. Not quite half of it is wetland, the rest of it is buffer. We have a paved driveway right now that's 1,285 square feet, so that's impervious surface, it's asphalt. And what we would like to do is to construct a two-story garage that's a one-story garage that's 20 by 20. And we're going to reduce the impervious area by 885 square feet. And right now, the pavement is 25 feet till you get to the wetland, and we're going to move the garage so that it's 45 feet away from the wetland. We're going to put pervious pavers just at the entrance to the garage, and we'll put a 2-foot drip edge all the way around the garage. We're 150 feet, the closest point of the garage to the roadway is 150 feet away. Our house is 200 feet, and right this time of year, you can't even see the house from the road. When all the foliage is gone, it's still barely visible. Right now, the neighbors that are on the south side of us can see from their backyard our cars parked in the driveway, and we feel that putting the garage up isn't going to be any more onerous than just the two cars there. This is showing you where we want to put the garage, and you can see that the roadway, which is Greenleaf Avenue, we have quite a long driveway to be able to get back to where our house is located. We put the garage there because the entire lot is planted. We have trees, and we've been in the property for 44 years, and so the trees are quite large, and we don't want to disturb any of the other areas, and the pavement seems like the best place to put the garage. I don't know if there's anything else you want to look at.
Would you like to speak to the criteria before he?
Sure. So 10.233.21, the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. The proposed garage will be located close to the center of a 1.14 acre of private property surrounded by trees, shrubs, and perennial plantings. The garage will be barely visible from the road and barely visible to the neighbor on the northeast, and no more visible to the neighbors on the south than the current driveway is with parked cars. Number 3, 10.233.22, the spirit of the ordinance will be observed. The proposed garage is modest in size and will be 150 feet from the roadway and not obstructive in any way. 10.233.23, substantial justice will be done. The home was constructed in 1979, approximately 15 years before the wetland buffer restrictions existed. The home is occupied by the original owners, and due to the wetland and the buffer, there's no more suitable area for the garage to be placed since it will be sited on a currently paved area. The remainder of the pavement will be removed, resulting in 885 square feet less of impervious surface area. The values of the surrounding properties will not be diminished. As stated previously, the garage will be barely visible from the road and barely visible to the neighbor on the northeast, and no more visible to the neighbors on the south than the current driveway with parked cars. And 10.233.25, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. We recently purchased a new electric vehicle, and we would like to protect our investment from damage due to inclement weather and falling acorns, as well as having a charging station undercover.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
So I don't, it's page 49 in our packet. I don't know what it might be in yours, but that picture with the crosshatch and then the green is, oh, the one that's right up right now. So the crosshatch, is that wetlands? And
Buffer.
then that's the buffer.
That's the
and
buffer.
then this is wetlands.
The green part is, the dark green part is wetland.
Okay, all righty.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Oh, I'm sorry, I
do.
didn't see. Mr. Rossi.
I mean, basically, the variance is to get the location of the garage closer to the road than your house, right? So, since the wetlands buffer encompasses both the front and back kind of yards of your house, how does that affect the placement? Why is it advantageous? Why do those conditions militate toward putting the garage in front of the house instead of behind it?
Because everything else is planted, and to get behind the house, we actually put in a retention pond when we first bought the house, and it's in order to put the driveway further toward the back, we'd be disturbing more of the buffer. You know, we'd still have to come down the full length of the driveway and then drive that much further to get to the back of the house.
So there would be a big increase in the impervious surface within the buffer.
Well, there would still just be 400 by 400, but we would be putting crushed stone or something in order to make up the rest of that distance. And right now, it's well-treed, and there's lots of planting beds.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone to speak in favor of this petition? In favor of the petition. Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the petition? Is there anyone to speak to, for, or against this petition? Okay. If not, the public hearing is closed. Mr. Mantle.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the application as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Go ahead, Mr. Mattson. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Mantle.
They look so alike.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay, I didn't think I cut that much off. Well, I mean, looking at the petition, it's fairly straightforward. I believe your hardship is the zoning in itself. This zoning would not be, in Portsmouth, it's perfectly fine because we are more of a suburban urban community where the garages are usually the same level as the house or behind the house. If this was in Greenland or Stratham, you wouldn't find, I don't think you would find this in a more rural community because the lots are a lot bigger. So for that reason, I made the motion because this is the only thing they're in conformance is the fact that the garage is, closer to the road than the house is on a one and a half acre lot, which would be typical of a 1.5 acre lot any place else in any other community, except the city of Portsmouth. To the criteria, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. It would not be. The public has no interest in a garage that's behind a grove of trees across a wetland. Granting the variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance. Yes, it would. And granting the variance would do substantial justice. Yes, it would. Again, we're talking about a large lot with a house that's already there. As Mr. Rossi, in his discussion with the applicant, to change the location of the garage to meet the criteria for the ordinance would involve a lot longer driveway, possibly cutting down, 1 or 2 trees to sit it behind the house, and it's all in the buffer. Granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties. I don't believe that's true. As for the hardship, I've already stated the hardship is the fact that it's a very large lot, and the entire building envelope is in the wetlands buffer. I will add a stipulation that our approval is conditional upon the planning board's granting a conditional use permit. But other than that, that's why I made the motion to approve.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that this doesn't alter the essential character of the neighborhood, and aside from the actual wetland and wetland buffer making this property unique, the structure itself is set far extremely back, so far back that the 30-foot rear yard setback would make it difficult to place this accessory structure anywhere else, and due to the fact that it's barely visible from the street, it would not be contrary to the public interest, and is consistent with the intent of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Can I hear a little bit more about the stipulation, please? What is it that you're stipulating?
Yeah, just,
Well, I mean, reading through the applicant, they've already gotten Conservation Commission approval, which has been recommended to the planning board. The planning board will have to, accept that recommendation and grant a wetlands conditional use permit.
which is on the staff memo.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Any further discussions, concerns? Okay. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mannell?
Yes.
Ms. Margison?
Yes.
Mr. Rossi?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. You have your garage. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Oh, no. Okay, Mr. Ram has returned. The next order of business is the request of Carl Douglas Overn and Tashiana Overn, owners for property located at 40 Wilson Road, whereas relief is needed to construct a sunroom and deck expansion at the rear of the property, which requires the following. 1, variance from section 10.521 to allow an 8-foot rear yard where 30 is required, and 2, variance from section 10.321 to allow a non-conforming structure or building to be extended, reconstructed, or enlarged without conforming to the requirements of the ordinance. Said property is located on Assessor Map 251, Lot 57, and lies within the Single Residence B District. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the board. My name is Carl Overn. I'm joined here by my wife, Tatiana Overn. We are the owners of 40 Wilson Road. It is our primary residence. We've resided there since June of 2019. We are hoping to build a 4-season sunroom extending 16 feet into our backyard, which will extend the bottom portion of a bi-level breezeway. You can see it in picture number 2, that connects our house to the garage. This transforms this 4-foot narrow space, as depicted in photo number 3, into a new living space approximately 20 feet in length. We are also hoping to extend the rather tight 10-foot wide deck which exists today into an additional 10 feet further alongside the sunroom. In order to do so, we require variance from two sections, 10.521 to allow construction with rear setback of approximately 8 feet where 30 feet is required and 24 feet is existing. In section 10.321, which states no existing non-conforming structure can be extended unless the proposed extension is in conformance with the regulations of the district in which it is located. Speaking to the 5 criteria, granting will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Our backyard is fairly enclosed. To the east, you can see in photo 4, there are trees and rock, which close us off from our next door neighbor to the east. And to the west, we have a real lengthy setback from Grant Street in excess of 80 feet. This addition would only really come close to our immediate neighbor to the south at 160 Grant. We've spoken to this neighbor directly about our project and received a favorable opinion. Furthermore, where it approaches her property, there is a 7-foot tall fence and 3 trees which grow higher than the structure that separated itself. We don't believe the values of the surrounding properties will be diminished. We believe they will be increased. Substantial justice will be done by granting the variances. With respect to the balancing test, hardship to the owner versus public benefit, we feel it's safe to say the loss to the applicant, ourselves, by denial of the variance clearly outweighs any gain to the public in enforcing it. Enforcement of the ordinance will not result in any unnecessary hardship. When day one, when we moved in, we looked at that little narrow space and we really wanted to extend it out and make it a livable space. Altering the location of the addition to some other part of the house would require much more impact to the home. Enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary costs to the homeowner while offering no benefit in either aesthetic or function. And lastly, there is no fair or substantial relationship between the purpose of the ordinance as it applied to the particular property. The amount of additional building coverage proposed, 224 square feet of the indoor floor space and 200 square feet of the additional deck, is minimal and not out of character for the neighborhood. Thereby, we please ask that you grant this variance.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Rossi.
Trying to get to the right page, just a second.
Okay.
Just for clarity, on the proposal rendering, if you could bring that up, it's like a graph paper with...
Page 66.
Yep. The distance of 8 feet from the sunroom to the property line, is that really measured from the center of the sunroom? What about the corner, like on the left-hand side there? Because that's probably the closest point.
Yeah, when I did it on Map Geo, I went from that closest point, and that's where I got the 8 feet.
Okay, so it's actually, so the line's just in the wrong place. It'll be 8 feet from that corner of the sunroom to the property
Yeah, I
line.
actually did it on Map Geo from that corner, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, thank you.
No, thanks.
Is there anyone to speak in favor of this proposal? Is there anyone to speak in opposition to the proposal? Is there anyone to speak to, for, or against? Okay. Public hearing is closed. Yes?
I will make a movement to approve the variance request as presented and advertised.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rossi. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rayum. Okay, would you like to speak to your motion?
Sure. Granting the variance will not be contrary to the spirit or the intent of the ordinance. Hold on, let me get to the criteria. And will not be contrary to the public interest. There is no public interest in micromanaging the configuration of the backyard, and this addition does not in any way affect the public interest. So that criterion is satisfied. Granting the variance would do substantial justice. There is no loss to the public that would outweigh the loss to the property owner if this variance were to be denied. Granting the variance would not diminish the values of surrounding properties. I actually think that tidying up the backyard with this proposal will make the area a little bit more enticing and pleasant, and I believe it will enhance the value of the surrounding properties that have sightline into the backyard. I would say that with regard to the unnecessary hardship, the special condition of the property is that it's the house is oriented on the property kind of in a diagonal, so the distance to the property line as you get to edges of the building is going to be a little bit off because of the diagonal nature of the. It's not really a diagonal, but it's not a square location of the structure on the property line, and due to that special condition of the property, it's the setback requirements don't need to be strictly adhered to.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just touch again a little bit more on the hardship. I do think that, it does seem to be on its face asking for a fair amount of relief with 8 feet where 30 feet is the requirement. And, the single residence B district is intended to have a lot of room between properties, but I do think that fundamentally that is being adhered to here. The applicant is fortunate in that the backyards of the existing neighbor, and then there's sort of the cluster of trees and sort of open area that's in the middle of this block that's formed by the streets in the area, really create a sense that the property line, the closeness to the property line is not nearly as problematic as what it might originally appear. So I think with that, I think they are meeting the hardship requirement that the use, this relatively minor expansion of an existing sort of narrow, odd-shaped room is a acceptable use for the property. And with that, I think they're meeting all the criteria.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Murchison.
So, I will be supporting it, but I did, this application did give me pause, because I do think the 8 feet from the backyard, the rear yard setback is a pretty significant ask. However, I do think that there are special conditions in the configuration of the lot that make it a little bit difficult to work with, so I will be supporting it.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, if not, a yes vote is to approve the new building. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mannell?
Yes.
Ms. Margison?
Yes.
Mr. Raham?
Yes.
Mr. Rossi?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. You are approved. Okay. Next is item G, the request of Go Low Inc., care of Labrie, owner, for property located at 2059 Lafayette Road, whereas relief is needed to demolish the existing structure and construct a 2-story residential building containing 16 living units, which requires the following. 1. Variance from section 10.1113.20 to allow parking to be located in front of the principal building. 2. Variance from section 10.533 to allow a structure to be located 58 feet from the central line of Lafayette Road, where 80 feet is required. 3. Variance from section 10.521 to allow 1,715 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit, where 7,500 square feet is required. And 4. Variance from section 10.440, use number 1.53, to allow 16 units where 8 are permitted. Said property is located on Assessor Map 268, Lot 13, and lies within the mixed residential district. Hello.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Attorney Derek Durbin. I'm here on behalf of the Labrie family who filed the application that's before you tonight. Before I get into the presentation, if I could just pass out a letter, which I'm not sure whether you did receive it or not, but it's a well, actually, it's 2 letters that kind of came in late, one of which I was copied on, and another of which Mike Labrie was copied on. I will just warn you that the letter that I was copied on I tried to print it, it came out very garbled, so we just had it reprinted exactly verbatim as the signed version reads, so that you could better read it. So, if I could.
The same one.
Yes, one's garbled, one's not.
Bottom one is just reprinted so that you could read it, because I couldn't read the signed version that was printed out. I don't know if the planning department received it like that as well, but it came in very late.
Yeah, the other ones are coming.
It's from Mark Syracuse.
You can start.
Okay. I believe most of you are probably familiar with the Labrie family in one fashion or another, whether it's through their support of the arts and cultural institutions of Portsmouth or just through their business endeavors in and around the area, Jimmy's Jazz Club, Atlantic Grill, River House, the project that you are familiar with on this board in the former location of the Portsmouth Health Food Store. I have Mike and Peter Labrie here tonight in case there's any specific questions for them. I also have our esteemed and brilliant engineer and architect with me tonight, Eric Weinrott from Altus Engineering, as well as Mark Giannini from McHenry Architects. So they're here to answer any engineering or design-related questions that you might have. The property at 2059 Lafayette Road actually consists of two separate lots, deeded lots, I should say, is located at the intersection of Lafayette Road and Hoover Drive. The building is located on the lot that is closest to the corner of Hoover Drive and Lafayette Road. And then the parking lot is actually, it spans both lots in its existing condition. James Labrie first acquired an interest in the property in 1967. Ownership has since passed to his children. When considering both lots together, the property is quite large, and here the proposal would be to merge both lots together. They're just over 0.6 acres in size. The property contains a two-story mixed-use building with finished lower level. As you will notice when you drive by the property slopes down from Lafayette Road to the rear of the property. So if you're looking at the back side of the property, the lower level is essentially ground level with the rear parking lot. The lower level and the first floor of the left side of the building, which is the original building, are vacant. They were last occupied by the Lafayette Animal Hospital from the mid-1980s until it moved into a different building down the road in 2021. Top floor contains 3 two-bedroom apartments that have been there since James Labrie first acquired his interest in the property in the 60s. The right side of the building, which is an addition to the original building, was constructed in the 1970s. That's currently occupied by Dock and Builders, is used as office space. The property can be accessed either by Lafayette Road or Hoover Drive. The larger parking area, I believe it has 17 spaces, is in the front, adjacent to the right-of-way. The smaller parking lot that contains 6 spaces is in the rear. The property is very unique. It's essentially an island as it is currently zoned. It's zoned MRB in an area of Portsmouth where there are no other properties that share that zoning designation. I looked it up. The closest are, there's sort of another island property along Sagamore Road, which has has a ton of office spaces in it. right on the river, as well as then there's a small section of MRB zone property still in downtown Portsmouth. The immediately adjacent neighborhood is the large Elmwood Park neighborhood. That's right behind this property. The property across Hoover Drive is zoned SRB, but contains two buildings with 24 units in them each. It's called the Westerly. I'm sure you're familiar with that as well. That particular building was constructed sometime after 2017 when this board had granted some similar density relief for that project to proceed. Since the Lafayette Animal Hospital vacated the commercial space in 2021, the Labries have had difficulty re-renting that particular space. It's in pretty poor shape and is really in need of a full-scale renovation if it were to be utilized again. It was utilized for a very particular purpose, for the many years that it was occupied, and it's basically run down, suffers from physical and functional obsolescence in its existing condition. So given the cost of labor and materials post-COVID, it's really, it wouldn't be economically feasible to try to rehabilitate the building as a whole, which is also a big reason why the prevailing trend throughout the area and elsewhere in the country is really to demolish and rebuild on properties like this. And again, that's the reason that we're seeking to redevelop the property tonight. The residential units would each be under 750 square feet in size. This would, given the location, the size of the units, it would allow the Labries the opportunity to offer of more affordable housing to their employees, the many businesses that they have. They've had trouble retaining local workers due to the local housing market and how expensive it is, and also just the general lack of housing. There are 4 variances needed to redevelop the property as proposed. Of the 4 variances being requested, 2 do relate to the existing conditions, which the applicant is actually bringing into greater conformity with the ordinance. By eliminating the large parking area in front of the existing building along Lafayette Road, the property is being brought into greater compliance with Section 10.533 and Section 10.1113.20 of the ordinance relative to the setback to Lafayette Road and parking within the primary front yard. Right now, in its existing condition, that particular setback from Lafayette Road is measured from the parking area, which essentially encroaches in the right-of-way, so there's no setback in its existing condition. The building, there will be no parking in the front if we're able to get the variances tonight. So the setback would be an improvement of roughly 58 feet. The staff memo said 42 feet, I believe, somewhere, but I think that was probably just an error. The other 2 variances that we're seeking tonight are related to density, and they're interrelated variance requests, since the density that we're seeking is not permitted under the ordinance. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or simply move through the variance criteria.
Continue.
Okay. Granting the variances will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance or the public interest. The existing building on the property is tired, as I mentioned, does suffer from obsolescence, and no longer meets current code. That's made it difficult to rent the commercial space, which the Lafayette Animal Hospital previously occupied, which was a large portion of the building. And rehabilitating the building is really cost prohibitive and doesn't make sense. It would also do very little to improve the conditions of the property. The front of the property is a sea of asphalt with 140 feet of uncontrolled access on Lafayette Road that requires vehicles to actually back into the right-of-way, or if there's enough clearance, move forward, but nonetheless creating a safety hazard from the property. By bringing the building 15 feet closer to Lafayette Road than the existing building, parking in the primary front yard will be eliminated, replaced by landscaping, as well as a 6-foot wide multi-use pathway that the city has planned for the area. This will improve the curbside appeal of the property, provide for safer access, and a more walkable, pedestrian, cyclist-friendly environment, which is a benefit to the public. Landscaping enhancements will also, actually, very significant landscaping enhancements will be added throughout the property to give it a much greener appearance, create better vegetated buffers than what exists now from surrounding properties. Open space will increase by over 7% from the existing condition, and the rear setback to the nearest Elwyn Park abutters would increase by 15 feet. So for these reasons, the redevelopment of the property will improve the light, air, and space of abutting properties and produce a new code-compliant building that has more than sufficient parking to meet the proposed use. The property was developed prior to any stormwater management permitting requirements, thus the runoff from the site currently discharges onto abutting properties. Substantial improvements will be made to that to manage the stormwater runoff. There's also a slight reduction in impervious surface coverage proposed. So for all the aforementioned reasons, I'd submit to the board that granting the variances will promote the public health, safety, and welfare, also bring the property into greater conformance with the city's building, planning, and zoning regulations in the spirit and intent of the ordinance. The request for 16 units might look like a big ask on paper. I don't think it really is when you consider what higher intensity uses of the property could be made under MRB zoning, which I listed a number of examples in the narrative. I won't go over all of them, but considering any combination of those uses, including a convenience store that could be open from 6 to 11 at night, other uses that don't even have restricted hours, it would bring a lot more vehicular traffic to the property. Many of the MRB uses are incompatible with the residential character of the surrounding neighborhood, particularly when you do consider the fact that a much larger commercial building containing a number of different uses could be constructed on the property that would comply with at least the use requirement of the ordinance. The proposed building is smaller in size and scale than either the multi-family buildings across Hoover Drive at the Westerly. Of the 48 units over there, they're well over 1,000 square feet each. They're also located on 3 different levels, whereas the proposed units 205-9 Lafayette Road would be on 2 levels and under 750 square feet in size. Granting the variances would result in a use that's consistent with the neighborhood. It's designed and scaled similar to other projects that have recently been developed in Portsmouth and residential areas. As such, granting the variances would not alter the essential character of the neighborhood and would serve a public benefit in the end over what could be developed on the site. Substantial justice will be done by granting the variance relief. There really would be no gain to the public by denying them. Granting the variances would result in all the improvements that I've mentioned in the property. Would also result in the addition of 16 units to what is already a very scarce housing market. The size, location of the units lends themselves very well to housing that's more affordable than any of the new construction you find in downtown Portsmouth. And again, the Labree's hope is that they would be able to offer that housing first to their employees. So in the present case, the loss to the applicant outweighs any gain that could be perceived by the public in denying the variances. Surrounding property values would not be diminished by granting the variances. And again, with this, I think you have to look at the context of what really could be developed in terms of a larger scale commercial, mixed commercial use building on the property and the impact that that would have on the surrounding neighborhood. Parking would also likely end up being relocated closer to the nearest residential abutters, which obviously wouldn't be a benefit to anybody. For these reasons, also just again citing to the Westerly project, which is evidence that surrounding property values would not be diminished. So for these reasons, I believe that granting the variance meets the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Finally, literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. The property really is an anomaly in terms of its location, size, and zoning designation. Again, I've already mentioned there's no other MRB zone properties in this area of Portsmouth. It's likely that the city hasn't rezoned it just because since Mr. Labrie first acquired an interest in the property in the 60s, it's been used for various mixed commercial residential uses. So for those reasons, the city probably kept the zoning as it was. Notwithstanding, I would argue that it's inconsistent, again, with the surrounding neighborhood. So for these reasons, I believe there is no fair and substantial relationship between the general purpose of the ordinance provisions that apply here and their application of the property. And hope that you feel the same and will grant the relief that's being sought tonight. It's a good project. It's very well designed. It will be a very attractive building, as the renderings in your package show. A lot of the engineering concerns associated with the site have already been considered. Obviously, if the variances were granted, it would still have to go through TAC and site plan approval, which is a decent road to haul ahead. But it's a well thought out, well planned project, and it's I think much needed for the city of Portsmouth. So I thank you for your time. I probably spoke slightly over what I was allotted, so I apologize for that. And be happy to answer any questions or turn it over to the true experts in the room.
Mr. Rossi?
Oh, no, Paul was ready. He was.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Couple of questions. One is Mr. Aaron Jones, who owns 2021. Does he reside at 2021, or did he just own the property and rents it out?
Is that one of the letters that I passed
Letters you
outside?
just
I didn't
had.
have a chance to read it before the meeting. He's the owner of the property, so, yes.
Not the resident.
I'm sorry.
Not the resident.
He's not the resident.
What I find intriguing, I do think that 16 units is a big ask, despite your rationale for it. But what I find intriguing about it is on page 2 of your description of the project, where the statement is made that the immediate intent behind construction of the building is to create housing for employees of the Labrie's business, so on and so forth. Obviously Portsmouth is in very severe need for workforce housing, and it is one of the objectives of the city to increase the workforce housing stock within the community, and a number of proposals have been floating around to do that. I think it's actually pretty great that people who really, in this case, your clients who need the workforce are willing to get out there and create affordable housing. I'm wondering if your clients would be amenable to a stipulation that this project meet the criteria of workforce housing as outlined in the Portsmouth zoning ordinance and RSA 674.58.
And just to clarify with our staff planner tonight, it's my understanding that that would require 4 of the 16 units be restricted. It's the 20% threshold is my understanding of the law. But
Let me double check on that.
to verify, since I'm not
But I
a
believe that is
mathematician.
It would
correct in
require
our
a covenant to comply with that for a period of time, so that it's not just an intent for
Yeah.
immediate, but it's an actual longer-term solution to some workforce housing difficulties.
Yeah, one of the issues that we have with this, unfortunately, with this zoning designation, which is again a huge reason why it's a unique property, is that just right over in the Gateway District, there are development incentives that developers receive to create workforce housing, basically, and to deed restrict their properties. That doesn't apply, unfortunately, at least that in this instance, they can't take advantage of all the same incentives that would apply over in the Gateway District to allow an even larger project. The other issue that we sort of run into is particularly with the intent here is with the deed restriction, obviously you have to meet the statutory criteria and then anything that the city has overlaid. One of the issues is just simply it doesn't allow for much flexibility for the Labries if they wanted to bake any type of incentive in for their employees. So it would be at least 4 of the units would have to follow that, that criteria. I'm happy to ask them, but I would probably, need, a few minutes to discuss that, so I'd probably do that while you're taking public comment. But I think ultimately what they would like is the flexibility not to be tied to that restriction, particularly since they can't take advantage of any of the development incentives or anything. They're also not, as far as I know, that not financing this in a way where they could necessarily take advantage of some of the credits that are available. So it's a tough situation just because they lose the flexibility, but they also lose some of the incentives that others would receive if they were just like right over the line.
True.
Yeah.
Recognizing, of course, that they would, under that rubric, they would be receiving a variance for 16 units, where one might argue that that in and of itself is an incentive.
Sure.
Are there other questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Manning.
Thank you. Couple of questions, but to touch on what Mr. Rossi said, when you're using the term workforce housing, workforce a misnomer, it's your personnel housing.
It's personnel. We haven't used the word. I've been very careful not to use the word workforce housing or the phrase workforce.
But it's housing for
It's
Labree's
intended to be
employers.
But they also don't want to be restricted in that sense in case employees aren't taking advantage of it. So it is really just a request for 16 units. It's just, I'm not trying to deceive the board in that sense.
Correct, but this is housing for their employees.
It's not housing that they're gonna they wouldn't offer the housing for free to employees. I mean, maybe there's some scenario where that would be discussed, depending on what the employment arrangement is. But it would be rented housing that they would make available, at a reasonable rental rate to first to employees. Yeah.
My second question, I don't know if it's for you, Derek, or for Stephanie. Right now, I'm looking at the zoning table, and it says 5 to 8 units are allowed in MRB, correct? They have 2 lots of MRB. So is the 5 to 8, that's get knocked down per the density per lot?
So that's what is allowed on a lot, but you still have to abide by the lot area per dwelling unit, which they are.
Okay, so the density.
Yes.
So if they merge the 2 lots, they're only allowed under zoning 3 units because it's 7,500 square foot per unit.
That's not how I did the calculation, but
Lot area per dwelling unit, 7,500.
yes.
And they're 27 and a half.
That was our interpretation, Paul. Yeah.
What?
That was our interpretation is the 3
So it'd be
units.
3.
Yeah, because we're under 30,000 square
Okay.
feet. Yep.
Okay, so it's more of a density issue than the number of dwelling units.
Oh, but it amounts to you can't have one without the other.
Well, I get that.
Correct.
I get that.
Yeah.
So it's up to 8 per lot, which would be up to 16 per lot, and then we're just strictly looking at a density issue.
Yes, but they've merged
They're
the
merging the
lots.
lots.
So they
Merging
lost
the
them
lots.
lots
Oh,
of
yeah,
merged.
yeah.
So they no longer have double, they have 1 lot.
Okay, okay.
I just want to make something clear. So
Yes.
while the housing would be suitable for the employees,
Correct.
it isn't solely for the employees. Is that true?
The
Or is
intent-
it first come, first served for the employees and then whatever's left?
Yeah, the intent would be to first offer it to employees. If there's anything that remains after that, then that would be marketed to the public. That's my understanding, and
At market rate?
if I could let Mike Labrie answer that?
Michael Labrie. The intent is to have 16 units that are available to rent to the public. We've designed the project such that the market rates would be lower than larger units, and so we feel that we are helping the situation with employees in the city to find housing. It's nothing that we intend to restrict and reserve for our employees. We don't have, maybe we could find a few of them that could take advantage of this, but that's really not the driving force. It's to try to create additional inventory for our community.
Okay. Sorry, did I miss?
I'm not sure if Mr. Mayor was done or
Are
not.
you
I need
still-
2 sets of eyes. Go ahead.
Are you
Did you have a
talking?
question?
I do, but
ahead.
I can wait for whoever's next. So.
Oh, you can go, please.
So I think I find this a little hard to analyze. I'll have to be completely honest, because I do think that the MRB designation surrounded in that sea of SRB, and then Office Research is across the street, and the diagonal is the Gateway 1 district, makes it a little tough. So it's very hard to discern what the spirit and intent of the ordinance is, because it's just hanging out there. At the same time, I'm trying to wrap, because hardship is something that we have to wrestle with. I want to give you another run at the hardship. So what special conditions of this property make it, I guess, impossible or close to impossible not to use it as an MRB? And I know that you talked about, well, the businesses that could be used in MRB would be more, I guess, intrusive on the neighborhood, but why can't you use it as an MRB?
Well, I would first, I think I would take a different opinion of how the hardship criteria is intended to be read. I don't think it's that you can't make any other use of the property. It's just simply that there are these special conditions that make it less feasible to make certain uses of property, but also that make it more conducive to other uses of property. In this instance, the special conditions, in our opinion, are the size of the 2 lots when considered together, the surrounding context of the area, and the context here is residential, and it's really the gateway to that Elm Park neighborhood is really characterized by the Westerly project across Hoover Drive. The zoning, I think, is a big thing. It's a zoning that is antiquated for these particular properties, and it was simply zoning that was reflective, in our opinion, of the historical use of the property. It just, it was used for this sort of mixed use, lower level commercial residential use that never sort of changed because it didn't have to. But everything around it has since sort of morphed into a different zoning and different uses. So I believe those are the special conditions that
Eric Weinberg with Altus. I think some of the special conditions are the way the lot was developed at its time with that free-for-all access along Route 1 and the cars backing up, that if we were to try to redevelop it, we would need to make it more conforming. And so making it non-conforming, we're going to close off most of that access. Then we basically limit those parking spaces in front useless. And so having storefronts with no access in front, and you have to go around the back, and there's a grade change of several feet, that getting ADA access up to the front would be very difficult, and without parking in front of that retail, that is a traditional condition, which is not allowed by zoning anymore, people are going to drive by and see the front face of that retail, that storefront empty because there's no parking there, so they're not going to have that feeling that it's a vibrant retail operation. So by keeping it in that office use, we're really handcuffed with that access and parking in front. And so I think that really is a special condition of the site. And that was part of why we moved that building forward to get all that parking away. And we also are eliminating the driveway that is literally this far away from the stop bar on Hoover Road, on Hoover Drive, so that we're creating a safer access and trying to manipulate that existing building to make it safer from a vehicular standpoint and a pedestrian standpoint would be very challenging. Additionally, it has been a desire of the city to create a multi-purpose path, as we've done on multiple projects, including the Westerly and going up to the McKinnon's Plaza and so forth. With cars parking in that area, we wouldn't be able to continue that thread of that multi-purpose path. So those are things that I believe that are inherent with the land and special conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, I just say that I'm trying to figure out how it can't be converted to a single residence B use because the lot size is just a little bit above that. I will say, I think the 16 units is a bit of an ask, but I do think that the project is very well thought out. I think the taking into account Lafayette Road and the access off Hoover, although the folks on Hoover may have a different idea of that, but I think the fact that adequate parking, if we're still allowed to provide adequate parking for all the residential units in the building, was well thought out. And I do think that this is a very, very well thought out project. So I just want to say that.
Mr. Ram.
We're still doing questions? Okay. I have a few questions. So on page 4 of 7 of your write-up, that's page 89 on our packet, second paragraph from the bottom, talking about that parking in the secondary front yard, which is one of some of the relief that you need. You basically say that there's no public benefit to preventing it. I'm trying to understand what the benefit is to the project. You have, my sense is you have all the parking that you need underneath the building. What's the genesis for adding that parking and invoking the need for relief?
Yeah, I can let Eric answer that specifically, but I think it's just simply to be able to. Do you want
to? Our intent was that the parking underneath was resident parking, and so that someone coming wouldn't have to visit, wouldn't necessarily have the ability to go into the parking garage or so forth. So we provided one handicap space outside and then 3 visitor regular parking spaces there, and not to encumber Hoover Drive with people parking. There were some opportunities to move it around the back, but then we'd really be chewing up a lot of the green space. So this is the access in and out of the site. I felt like it's a better situation than what we have now, and we're moving our intersection back from Hoover Drive. We're also eliminating one that's right up against the residential use. And although, when you get into the final planning issue, we're actually almost an exact wash with green space on this project. So we're not like and that's because we're doing the parking underneath. So if we got rid of those spaces, we wouldn't have visitor parking and would actually have a reduction in impervious.
Okay, thank you. On page 6 of 7, and you might want to this could be another question for you, which is page 91 of our packet. So again, you talked a little bit about wanting to move the building closer to the road. I guess through all the discussion, maybe I missed it. I'm still not understanding what's the driving force for putting the building closer to the road, because it is, again, driving a need for relief from the 80-foot from Lafayette Road requirement.
We looked, closely at trying to create an open space area for the residents, create a buffer to the residential property, and so that's why we're balancing, pushing back and forth on where we went. Could we have, moved it 5, 10 feet further back? Possibly, but the parcel is also a little bit skewed, and so as we move further back away from the road, we get closer to that side yard setback to the north.
Okay, but there's not like a structural issue that's driving you there, like a need for a water, recess area or drainage issues or anything along those lines. It's more desire to keep away from the residential area.
That is primarily it. Right now, it is interesting is that a significant amount of runoff from Lafayette Road runs through the site between the existing building and the property to the north. They actually, if you go out there, you see some like 4 to 6 inch riprap at the edge of the parking because there's so much water coming off of Route 1 that drains through the site, erodes the site, and then it ponds up in days like what we've had the last couple of days, and then it continues through Ellen Park. We're going to have to control that runoff as it comes through, but by eliminating that pavement in front, we're going to be able to capture it, treat it, and then run it around the building and continue out and reduce the peak rate of runoff as we leave the site.
Okay. Another structural question for you is, looking at the plan and the sort of the renderings that you can see, particularly say you're drawing A10 on page 111 of our packet. You've done a pretty good job of lowering down, and you are taking advantage somewhat of the natural contours of the site. So you've lowered it down somewhat, but you still do have like a fair amount of reveal of the parking level to Lafayette Road. Was there any consideration to going down further to eliminate that reveal on that side, or is there something that prevents you from doing that, and or some reason why having the ventilation along the Lafayette Road side is critical to making the parking lot work?
I will let Mark speak to the architectural elements, but what we were looking at with the grading is to make sure that we're not draining all the water coming off of Hoover Drive back into that garage. So we need to balance that grade in there. And probably my preference would actually to be looking at raising that up another foot or two if possible.
Okay. This is where the architects and engineers fight each other.
Right, exactly. Evening, Mark Giannini from McHenry Architecture. So as Eric noted, based on the grading coming in from Hoover Drive is really kind of where the basement or the garage floor level is set. So, that basically kind of puts us down approximately half a story for the parking. Code requires an open parking garage to have an approximate open area along the perimeter. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. I think it's about 20% of open space on the walls. So that includes the entrance door, and then we could basically relocate some of the openings that we're currently showing in the rendering around to the other sides. But right now we were just trying to align them with existing or other proposed openings on the upper levels.
Okay.
So, and we're also looking to conceal some of that with landscaping.
Okay.
In the future.
And probably a question for you as well. So I'm old school. I use like the big giant zoning maps, and as has been pointed out by Attorney Durbin, the zoning that you're in now is I almost looks like a printing error. It doesn't even have like the letters on top of it as to what it actually is. But the next parcel down, this board back in 2017 basically bought into the argument that it was a large parcel, really looked like a lot of the other parcels in the G1 district, and so extending some of the same types of concepts to the G1 into that parcel made sense. Now your client is kind of asking to take the next step, and if we merge these two parcels, they'll kind of be a little bit bigger than some of the ones around them, and we want to take the next step on it. My question for you is if this was zoned G1, G1 is almost kind of like a character district in many senses. There's a laundry list of other requirements that fit into what you're required to have for the building in terms of architectural features, the way it's set up. There's, as has also been pointed out, there's also advantages It certainly recognizes a building with this many units in it. There are advantages to creating workforce housing, et cetera. But my question for you from an architectural standpoint is, do you have any sense of, if this was the GA1 district, is your design like somewhat compatible with what is called for in there, or would you have no idea whatsoever?
I don't know off the top of my head without looking closer at the criteria.
Yeah, it wasn't anything that you were taking a look at when you were putting together the design.
Not specifically for this. I mean, we did show examples of other multifamily projects that are in the area. Some of those are in the G1 district. But no, I mean, we were really looking at context of other properties on Route 1 that are multifamily, you know, like the abutting property at St. James.
Okay. And one last architectural question is on sheet A4, page 105 of our packet. You are showing a 2-bedroom layout. Is that the case for all of the units? Or are some going to be a mixture of 1-bedroom or some other arrangement?
The intent right now was that there would be 2-bedroom units, but
Okay.
we were just showing that as an example that it would fit well in that 749 square feet.
Okay. So 2 bedrooms, 749 square feet. That's,
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it kind of works. It's great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Mattson.
Yep. One comment, just kind of in response to David's, is something I noticed about this is related to the Gateway District and also good urban design is to have the building itself closer to the street than the parking. But my actual question is, even if I'm personally in favor of this project, as a board member, I have to follow the spirit of the ordinance. So I was wondering if you considered just proposing the 8 units that are allowed, and why you sought the need for 16?
Well, and I just want to make a point of clarification. So because of the lot area requirement, so yes, 8 units you're permitted up to in the MRB zoning district. And yes, we have 2 lots, and if you kept them separately deeded, you could have 16, but we don't have the lot areas that are bigger. That's really the overarching variance, which, if you apply the lot area calculation itself, restricts us to 3. I mean, I guess you could say that there's a potential conflict in the ordinance there, but the lot area is really where we get restricted in that sense.
Okay, no, I realize you'd still be needing relief, and aside from the other variants that you're asking for that are potentially less contentious, if it was 8 units, obviously the lot area per dwelling would be, there'd be more lot area per dwelling if it was half that. So, yeah.
Do you want to answer the designs?
I think part of Eric Weinrib again, the economics is that if we started trying to build it for just 8 units, the numbers no longer work, so that there's the magnitude of order building it up, and that's where we arrived at the density of the 16, is that the numbers with the parking garage work, the numbers with the units above work, and part of the economics is also with the building with units of 749 square feet, there's only so much they're going to get for rent, whether it's market rate or any other restrictions on it. That's a small unit. It's a very small unit. And kind of a sidebar is, we developed the Atlantic Grill property with the Labrie family many years ago, and I do remember long discussions with their father about that building, on how he wanted that building set back against the property line in the back and all the parking in front, so everyone could see all that parking and they would come to that site. And it was a long battle with your father to move the building up front, create that feeling with that green space in front like we did, and the parking in back, so that when you come into the Poise Corner, the roundabout, you don't see the parking, you see the building, and it really masks it. And that's kind of where we're trying to take this here, is putting that building forward, putting the parking inside, having a limited amount of parking outside.
If I may, I have one additional question for city staff, if I may. So in your staff memo, it's page 83 of our packet. You do recommend a stipulation for consideration. I guess I don't understand the motivation for that stipulation for consideration. Could you explain that a little bit better?
Yeah, so this is a common stipulation that I like to add on bigger projects, because as this project goes through TAC review and then planning board review, there are elements that could move around the property. It might alter a certain wall or, you know, the orientation of the building slightly. And so I just want to make sure that should this project receive the variances and go through that process, the project doesn't suffer because of the requirement that the building remain the same as it is proposed today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, I understand where you're coming from.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. Okay.
I have a couple questions. for
Sure.
staff. So just in terms of Mr. Rossi's asking about a stipulation about workforce housing, I just a question for city staff. I'm assuming we couldn't
can't
do
do
that
that.
through stipulation, yeah, because of the tax and the, yeah.
It's not ours to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. City staff is not supportive of that for a couple reasons. The main reason being that workforce housing requirement is under the Gateway District, and this project is not located within the Gateway District. So that creates some issues. There's also a lot of other elements that go into a proposal for workforce housing, and those have not been presented by the applicants. So it's just, we can't stipulate that as a condition of approval. They have to propose it.
Thank you.
Just for the record, this board actually did make that a stipulation a number of years back, and it did cause lots of headaches for the applicant that came before us. They agreed to it in the course of the meeting. To their credit, they went through the whole entire process. They did create the workforce housing as the board required, and but it was a nightmare for them to go through it all, and from that angle of based on the nature of where their property was and what they had to go through for it.
So no workforce housing discussion. Okay. Is there anything else you would like to say to us?
No, there's nothing else that we intend to present. So,
Okay, then I'll open it to the public. Thank you.
thank you.
Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in favor of this petition? In favor of the petition? Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? Yes. You may come up.
My name is John Hudson. I live at the Westerly. This is certainly a new experience for me, facing all of you and trying to make my point well known and I hope listened to. I moved to Portsmouth about 3 years ago, and the Westerly was being built. What I learned after we moved here was the Lafayette Speedway. I think you're all familiar with the traffic that's on Lafayette. And it was quite surprising to me how fast the traffic moves, both directions. And since we've lived here, I know of 3 major accidents that have occurred right smack in front of the Westerly, Hoover, and a little to the south that I know of. And I'm sure there have been some other accidents that I haven't been aware of, or very close accidents. My concern about this is that it's It's a safety issue. There's 8 units there now, fine. But to increase it to 16 with possible 2 cars in a unit, friends visiting, you're going to have a lot of traffic, car traffic there, especially for the residents in the back that use Hoover all the time to come out and make either a left or a right onto Lafayette. And it'll just be more and more congestion at that intersection. And I think it's a real risk to the community to increase from 8 to 16 and put more people at risk traveling on Lafayette, people pulling out of where I live. You have to sit sometime before you ever pull out. And the other thing I want to mention is West Boulevard, that's right smack in front of the Westerly. As you come to the end of West, it's supposed to be right turn only. You can go there maybe now and look at people making left-hand turns, which is a cause of big concern. Many, many times I start to pull out of the Westerly and go left, and somebody who's supposed to make a right only onto Lafayette off of the street, they make a left. And I don't know how many times I've just missed hitting somebody. So and I've never seen any law enforcement, nobody there ever getting a ticket for making a left-hand turn when they're not supposed to. It's well marked, it happens all the time. And Hoover's right there where this project is going to be built. Hopefully it stays what it is and doesn't increase the possibility of more accidents. So that's my concern, is the safety for the
I just want to say to
community.
you that before this could be built, it would go to traffic and safety. This would get further review.
Wait, I'd like to know where they are now with
It's a
Ocean.
process. I don't know where they are now. I don't know why everyone goes through red lights. I don't know. But
They can, well, I'm telling you, it happens
Okay.
every single day.
Okay. Is there anyone else to speak in opposition? You may come up.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Diane Mizuzawa, and I reside in the Woodlands, which is the other neighborhood this is going to be causing some concerns. So the big concern is that there are 2 neighborhoods behind the development that they're building along with the Westerly on Lafayette Road, and it is going to cause congestion in the area. And that is our concern, is the congestion with the housing. Having 8 units is great. What you're doing is wonderful for workforce housing, but it is just too big for the size of that lot, given the fact that there are 124 homes in the Woodlands, and I think in Elwyn Park, there's something like thousands of homes. So again, it's just going to create so much congestion, especially since there are only 2 main thoroughfares coming out of that neighborhood. So one being Hoover and the other being Harding. Will be trapped in there with that congestion.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. My name is Greg Mahana. I am a Portsmouth resident on Pheasant Lane, and I am also representing myself and the Pheasant Lane Homeowners Association. Those of you that don't know where that is, if you turn into Hoover and take the very first right, it's about 200 feet. There's a private neighborhood there of 9 homes that was subdivided from the St. James Church by Joe Sawtell, and you would recognize the term PUD. It's a private street and a private neighborhood. We fell under different zoning when Sawtell did that. Obviously, you're familiar because you're the zoning board. We worked with Eric Katz to be relatively successful with the Westerly. We couldn't control the house or the traffic, but we did work with them on access, and the church patrons used to come out Hoover Drive, or out Pheasant Lane, which used to be called 4 Hoover Drive, and come out onto Hoover. And that was restricted because that was too much traffic, and all the Portsmouth boards understood that at the time. You're dumping people out of the church into a residential neighborhood. That's not what you do with traffic. But anyhow, I'm representing Pheasant Lane Homeowners Association, and I'm also a landlord in Portsmouth, so I can speak intelligently about the rents and what they're trying to put here. I have numerous issues that I'd like to discuss with you guys. The first being traffic and sightlines. Some of my neighbors from the Westerly and my neighbors from Elwyn Park and the Woodlands have mentioned traffic, and it's good that Woodlands folks showed up because the developer didn't mention the Woodlands. There's many houses back there, and there's only 2 ways out of the Woodlands. So we're talking about 300 or 400 homes that use this road. I come out that street at least 4 times a day. It is a disaster. There's always backups. You can never turn southbound due to high-speed northbound traffic. And when you're trying to turn southbound, you look to the north. Right now, your sight line is already restricted because at the edge of this property, where the single-family home is next, the road is curving to the northeast. So your sight lines are naturally restricted. If you take a look at their drawings, they want to move this building closer to Route 1, further restricting the sight lines. And if you look at the drawing that actually shows a vegetation bed or plantings right at the crosswalk. So if you're in a number 1 spot trying to pull out Hoover Drive, you're going to be looking at landscaping. And by the way, on that drawing was a big snow pile where it says it's snow storage. So sight lines are my biggest concern, because if you're looking to turn south and you're watching high-speed traffic coming down from the north, you're not going to see them in time to make a turn. And as they mentioned, somebody mentioned 3 accidents. There's actually been at least 4 in the last 6 months. So I'd implore you folks to table this tonight, and I would ask that you require a traffic study, which they did not present to you, and also go out there and have a site walk. Because I think you'll find it kind of interesting standing on Hoover Drive looking to the north. You're going to find sight lines restricted, and you're going to look at the lot, and you're going to find out that the side of that building right now is actually 8 feet higher than the rear of that lot. And the back of that lot, I just left there at 5:45. There was standing water in there. I understand that they are representing that there's no wetlands there, but there's also no wetlands delineation lines on any of their plans to discuss that. And I can tell you from having built in Pheasant Lane, which is on that same plane, Pheasant Lane is all wet. Hoover Drive is all wet, okay? Now, the Westerly has already, one of the representatives from the Westerly has come to us as Pheasant Lane Homeowners Association asking to open that gate that I mentioned earlier. It's not our jurisdiction. We'd love to help them out with their traffic problem on Route 1, but we can't open that gate. It was restricted by the city, rightfully so, to keep from pushing traffic through residential neighborhoods. So here's what's going to happen. If this is built with those sight lines and that exit out onto Hoover Drive where it is, which is just ridiculous, all the traffic that's coming out of the Woodlands and coming out of the southern end of Elwyn Park is going to be dashing through all the Elwyn Park streets to try to find another way out onto Route 1. That's just a fact. And that also includes folks coming from the school that come out Hoover to go south on Route 1. If you drop your kids off at Dondero and you want to go south and do errands, you're going to come down to Hoover and try and get out. No more. So that's going to change right there. Let's see. Granting a variance, look at the existing, granting a variance to move the entire structure 15 feet closer to the center line of Route 1. I think you all should consider that very carefully. And I think one of the things you should look up is jurisdiction on that front setback. That's a state road. It's not a city road. So who gets to determine setbacks from the center line? And I will ask you to look up the New Hampshire 2011 State Transportation Plan, which shows Route 1 from Ocean Road all the way to Wilson. The money has already been funded for the engineering. It's in writing. Just look it up. And they're going to widen Route 1. That's their plan from Ocean Road all the way to Wilson to 5 lanes with a raised divider in the middle. I'm not making it up, it's a state document. And if you start out driving north from Ocean Road right now, you will find one property that is not set back the proper setback. And it's that little brick house slant building that is a lawyer's office right next door to the Jeep dealership. Other than that, they already have their easement and their access to widen Route 1 to 5 lanes. And if you guys move this building 15 feet closer to the middle of Route 1, it's gonna, I wish they had the picture up there that shows Route 1 on the front lawn, but that's not it. It is just gonna exacerbate the whole thing. So, let's see. Last but not least, while the property is a unicorn in the applicant's own words, it is and has been used in its current use for 23 years that I have lived there, and obviously they said it's been in the family since the 60s. This does not actually represent a hardship by definition for the developer, and it will jeopardize public safety. I am not in any way opposed to creating housing. This is not affordable housing. It's a public safety issue. I would be in favor of housing on this site, just not sited the way it is, creating a public safety traffic hazard. To conclude, tonight we heard the legal two-step with no projected rents. Making a statement that you are helping the housing market by building smaller units is a farce. A studio on the Route 1 bypass with the wonderful views of the U-Haul, 450 square feet goes for $2,200. I would argue that this is a more convenient location, and $2,200 is probably the base. But a 2-bedroom, right now over in Springbrook, 2 bedrooms are going for $2,400 to $2,600 market price without covered parking. And Springbrook, as you guys all know, was probably built 40 years ago. And when I moved here in the early 90s, they were selling for $75,000. This is in fact luxury housing. Covered parking, 2 bedrooms, convenient to Portsmouth. So call a spade a spade. There are no hardships. He doesn't deserve variances for setbacks, doesn't deserve variances for density. This is not employee housing. It's luxury apartments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Peter Sanderson of the Westerly, aforementioned Westerly. What could be developed on that land, the current land? Man, I hate veiled, clever threats. Anyway, I'll get past that. 0.6 acres is a large lot for 16 units, so the Westerly's on 4.15 acres, 7 times the lot size. If I'm doing the math correctly, and I don't have the 111 pages or, all of the architectural renderings, obviously, I have one piece of paper with a check mark next to it. That would equate to 112 units in the same scenario for the Westerly. Same scenario, 112 units. Density. There are 48. This is absurd. I mean, it couldn't have been said more eloquently. The safety issues, we've witnessed there on a daily basis. There's probably 20 to 30 vehicles that make U-turns in the Westerly. From Lafayette Speedway, I think, John, you correctly. It's when we moved here from Connecticut a couple of years ago, in a million years we wouldn't have thought that it was this busy. But Westerly's beautiful, 48 units, 24 of which are 1,800 square feet, 1,790 square feet. Roughly $700,000 plus value each. There's just. I was taking copious notes, but it's kind of a moot point, just because if this is passed, then there's going to be a whole nother level of interesting things that we're going to have to go through. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Marcelina Nowosadzki, Westerly as well. I did not prepare anything, but as I'm listening to all of this and clever words used to trick and plant seeds, very well done. I would like to also mention a few things. I heard that the value of the homes around this proposed building and the Westerly would not be affected. I believe that's false, unless this would be a luxury development. But if it is luxury development, I'm not sure if employees of restaurants would be able to afford it. So I would assume that it would be lower quality to squeeze in as many people as possible in 700 square feet, 2-bedroom, that's quite tight. Now let's think about the fact of everyone who's visiting those residents who cannot fit in the 3 spaces allocated. Where do they park? They will park at the Westerly. I will promise you that, because I already see people pulling up, parking, going for a run, coming back, pulling out. So that's already happening. They will be parking on the street, along the houses in the neighborhood, not safe. So just the whole argument of we're helping our employees, I think it's more of maybe we want to try something out. Maybe some of the employees will stay here because it's very difficult to find employees for restaurants. And I feel that, I mean, how many restaurants are being closed? I just don't believe that this is about creating affordable housing for employees to help the community. I believe that this is simply, let's squeeze in as much value units and get as much money as possible without really thinking of the residents around. And also the frequent mentions of the Westerly project. If you look around and actually walk around those 2 buildings, there's a lot of space around there. I walk my dog there all the time. We play fetch. It's huge. I walk next to this lot all the time with my dog as well. This is tiny, and I as said earlier, I would highly, highly recommend and ask you that you actually walk this site and see what it looks like. There are a few apartments there, and I'll bet you that those are rented and can be rented and maybe can be remodeled. And why not help people that way? Why squeeze in 16 units into tiny, tiny lot? This is big enough to be a parking lot for a few cars. It's too small for such a big building. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Karen Parnes. I'm a resident of Westerly. I have a couple of questions. I don't know if they can be answered, but I will preface my remarks with, I agree with all the other spokespersons. The fact is that allowing the building to be closer to Lafayette Road at the intersection of Lafayette and Hoover will be severely to the detriment of those who drive to and from Lafayette Road onto and off of Hoover, the Elwyn Park residents, as well as Pheasant Lane, and also the Woodlands. There are backups of traffic, and I don't know if you're aware, but about 2 weeks ago or so, there was an accident right on Hoover at the intersection, just below the intersection on Hoover, where a light post was hit by a vehicle and is now laying along the road. Well, it's off the sidewalk area of Hoover. And in fact, the 3rd week of September of 2021, an SUV driven by a single person coming from the southbound to the northbound on Lafayette Road ran off the road over the sidewalk onto Westerly property, where there is a bench for Route 41 bus. And fortunately, only damage was done to the vehicle, which ran into a pillar, a telephone pole or whatever, and then, of course, landscaping. But thank goodness no one was walking there right then, and no one was injured other than the person who was taken to the hospital off of Borthwick Avenue. Again, if this is a two-bedroom situation, I'm curious to know is how many residents, occupants would be permitted by the city requirements in a two-bedroom unit of 749 square feet. Correct me if I'm wrong, is what I thought I heard. How many parking spaces will be allotted for residents? If you have a two-bedroom unit, people have to travel to and from. Perhaps some will take the bus. However, you are likely to see at least two vehicles, if not many more. Where are they going to park? And by building this trying to build 16 units closer to Lafayette Road, that will even further obscure the view for those who are coming to Hoover and Lafayette Road from Elwyn Park residential area, as well as the Woodlands. The traffic is significant, and I have seen it and witnessed many almost accidents as well as other accidents. And the West Road, which is directly opposite the main entrance to Westerly, is, as others have suggested, a very significant access road into the industrial park, over to the community center, and for trucks, buses, and all. And people do come east on West Road and try to make and often do a left turn, which is illegal. Signs there, it's ignored. Nobody ever does anything about it. So all in all, putting 16 units, even 8 is of concern, but 16 units on 0.6 acres with a building that is going to be structurally tall enough to further obscure the traffic, that is of serious concern. And thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else to speak to, for, or against?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Jim Dolphin. I am also with the Westerly, as most of these folks are. I could have said many of the things that other people have said, probably much more eloquently than I would have, but I agree with it. In addition, that is it really logical to assume by putting more and more people in a smaller and smaller area that we're improving the quality of life for people in Portsmouth? I really don't get it. I don't see how it's possible. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, you did say 2 for against,
I
and I
did,
always
I
speak
did.
at 2 for and against. Never for and never against. My name is Rick Beckstead. I reside at 1395 Islington Street, and I know the applicants extremely well. My wife and I partake, our family does, with many of their fine restaurants. I also appreciate everything that Derek, their attorney, has gone and done, because the newspaper kind of put out there that this was a workforce project. And I would like to at least thank them for not really going and doing it. The article was misleading, and they were very honest and truthful when it came to it. And the reason is the workforce housing formula and what we have with the state and what we have with the city doesn't work. Developers don't want to use it. They don't want the restrictions. They can't afford the restrictions. Even at a 20% mandate, you're going to get more pushback. You're going to get more projects. You have another project that's going to be coming forward to you sometime in the near future of 74, and they have the ability, and staff has recommended to take advantage of the incentives. But cost effective, it isn't going to work. They're not going to do it. We've got to find another avenue when it comes to it. We also have to go away with the simple fact that building more units lowers the prices. It doesn't. It's misleading. Even Craig Welch, Portsmouth Housing Authority Director, said at a meeting at the Sherburne School Adding more housing will not lower the costs. The demand is too high. This is Portsmouth, New Hampshire. My God, when I was growing up here at about 14 or 15, when I was down in Florida, if I said I was from Portsmouth, they were lucky if they even knew what New Hampshire was. And then many, many years later, I actually was able to partake in a trip in Spain, Mallorca, and everyone there knew what Portsmouth, New Hampshire was. They want it. They want to be a part of this community. But the simple facts are this: the formulas don't work. They've even so said it. That's why it's 16 units. The smaller it gets, the more cost effective it ends up becoming. It's null and void. It won't work. I would simply go and ask, and I have for the better part of 11 or 12 years of my, whatever you want to call it, political career here in Portsmouth, is to preserve the ones that we have. That was a store, and I get it. You have no control as far as who wants to go into those places, but this was Chug-a-Lug. Everyone knows what Chug-a-Lug was. It was a convenience store, convenient for everybody, the Woodlands, Elwyn Park, and anyone else in Portsmouth. It was easy to get in, to get out, to be able to service us. So if the veterinarian thing isn't working, as far as with that being, what about more housing there? I'm a building contractor. I know what the cost factors are. Renovating is cheaper than building new. Why not simply go and put more residential there on the first floor? I'm sure even if you need a variance, they'd be willing to go and do that. And the structure is there. Eric Chinberg went and took 2 old buildings, converted them into housing. So that were commercial buildings. You could do something as simple as that. I know I'm preaching, and I know Labrie, as far as they have to do what they have to do, but this project in this manner, in this way, is literally unfeasible. I'm still surprised with the Westernly. I was there as a part of all of that. Yes, there were deed restrictions that you couldn't use Hoover. So why would we allow this one to use Hoover? And you know what's going to happen. There are 3 spaces that are there. They're going to line up on Hoover. Everyone knows what Hoover is. You've got a little narrow sidewalk, 2 narrow streets. You're going to have people that are lined up, and that driveway is 30 feet or less from a stop sign. And I think there's a restriction in the state of New Hampshire of 20 or 25 feet that you have to stay back from a stop sign. It's going to create more. This board and our planning board also went and denied an affordable housing. Everyone remember where the Subaru wanted to go and get built off the bypass? What ended up happening was, with the housing and the restrictions that were there, they were going to impede the rest of the neighborhood. So the new project was going to go through the neighborhood that was in back off of Echo Ave. We denied it. We denied it based on this very thing of concern. Because once you build it, you can't take it back. So please, look at the one thing, and the one thing that everybody says here: there is no hardship. The cost factor of a 2-bedroom, I know one of the other speakers in, market rate for a 2-bedroom in Portsmouth is between $2,700 and $3,200 a month. And that's what these will be to cover the costs and the expenditures of what it's going to take to build a project like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to speak to, for, or against?
Good evening again. I did hear some interesting comments regarding the Westerly and traffic, and we don't disagree that there are traffic issues on Route 1. And I can't believe people moved to the Westerly and had no clue what the Route 1 traffic is. That didn't change overnight. I've been here a very long time, not quite as long as Rick, but the traffic on Route 1 has been an issue forever. The Campus Drive, that is an enforcement issue. That road, people try to take a left coming out of Campus Drive. We're making the traffic situation better here. We're improving the sight line because we're getting rid of a driveway that comes right out at the stop bar of Hoover Drive. We're getting rid of parking in front that encumbers the sight line. We're meeting the zoning requirement by having the clear zone in the triangle of the 2 corners. We're keeping the vegetation low in front of the building so that we don't have the blocking from the vehicles and blocking from the vegetation. We're making it better. Yes, we are moving the building closer. We're increasing the actual structural setback from the right-of-way. Mr. Mahan is correct that they are looking at widening the road. Every person from the state of Maine to the state of Massachusetts working on Route 1 is held hostage by DOT and has to give them a 12-foot easement when they do a site development. If you look at our plan, that is on our plan. We're not working in a bubble. We're quite aware of what's going on with Route 1 DOT requirements. I also was involved with the development of the Westerly. And if I do remember correctly, there was a lot of discussion with the neighborhood. And the city of Portsmouth did not restrict that access to the to Pheasant Run. That was something that Eric Cates worked out with the neighbors and said, look, I will give you an enhanced buffer there. I will eliminate that access so that you are feeling protected there. That was not from the city. That was not saying the city, oh, we can't handle the access on Hoover Drive. No, that was something that Mr. Cates offered to that neighborhood. I was there. I was in those meetings. It's also interesting hearing the concerns of the traffic and also knowing that, you know, I don't know what the real plan of when DOT will do their project. They've been talking about a median down the road my entire career, which started in 1985. And maybe someday it comes to fruition. And when it does, the people who are still trying to take a left onto Hoover Drive today should be going up one intersection where there's a safe access and a signalized intersection, and that they can stop doing it. They're taking their own lives in their hand when they could spend another couple minutes, drive leisurely through the Ellen Park neighborhood and take a safe access onto Route 1. I assure you
Please.
that we're going to do everything we need to do to satisfy TAC, to satisfy traffic and safety. We'll be preparing a traffic study if that's what they're looking for. I also will say that if that were to be redeveloped and revitalized as retail, it's quite possible that the traffic that would be generated would be significantly more than what you're seeing from a 16-unit residential development that would continue to have access directly onto Route 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We have William Downey on Zoom.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're all set.
Okay, this is Bill Downey of 67 Bow Street. I just wanted to reiterate what Eric had just said, and it seems like it's pretty striking to me about the complaints about traffic, that the traffic flow would be significantly compounded if it were commercial. So in many ways, I think this would be a better situation going residential. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you again. For the record, Attorney Derek Durbin on behalf of the applicant. I just wanted to point out that I can appreciate some of the neighbors' concerns about traffic. I mean, anything new proposed for a site like this, any type of new use is I can understand how it could be scary and it could generate a lot of feelings and speculation. The reality is none of the concerns actually relate to the specific relief that we're seeking, which is really related to the density related to the acreage. Said, oh, this is too much for the lot, but the lot, as we've shown, as engineered, can support it. Traffic safety is, as Eric pointed out, an issue that has to be addressed. It has to be addressed at the planning board level. Traffic safety study has to be done. If they don't feel that it's adequate, obviously they're going to want modifications to the site. They could require, if it works, that the building be potentially moved back, which actually would still fall within any type of variance that this board could grant. So it wouldn't require us to come back here. And as pointed out as well, even assuming you could repurpose that existing building, obviously, they're going to have to put a substantial investment into it. It's not going to be a low-intensity use. I mean, it's what the ordinance permits, if they're forced into MRB zoning uses, is it's going to be substantially different than a vacant left side of the building and a very benign right side use of the building. It's going to be something that I don't think any of the folks at the Westerly have experienced as long as they've resided in their units. And it's probably not going to be Chug-a-Lug. It's going to be a larger version of something like that. And there's nothing, unless it required some type of variance from this board, to restrict the use in terms of the hours of operation. So, I mean, we really are dealing with an apples and oranges situation in that respect. I mean, but we can say it will certainly, it's no veiled threat, it will have to be a higher intensity use to be able to support the economics. So, with that said, the Labries really did feel like this was the appropriate use, taking into account, as they have with other projects, the character of what surrounds them. And this is just a side note, but I asked Mike, what are you charging for existing rents on the 2-bedroom units? And he said $1,400 a month. Now, of course, that's reflective of existing conditions, but it's still, I lived in a pretty poor place at one point in time, 15 years ago in Portsmouth, and that's probably what I paid for rent back then. So I think that kind of speaks to the mindset that they have. So I thank you for your time.
If there is something new to add, please.
They are asking for a variance from you today, which is to go from 8 units to 16 units, so doubling that. And I think it's the congestion, not just the traffic. The density is an issue, and that needs to be considered. There's a school back there. There are 3 neighborhoods. In back of that, it's the congestion, not just the traffic on Route 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Very quickly again, Rick Beckstead, 1395 Ilion Street. I was just going to say, because it had been presumed that this board has no ability as far as when it comes to the safety and the traffic, but alone, the vote as far as to allow 16, the amount, that's what they're asking for, will go and definitely control what the safety of this project is going to be and the volume of it being used. Thank you.
Paul Brandon, Westley, 20775 Lafayette. I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm sitting there and I said, he basically said it's unsafe. You're taking your life in your hands there. So you get 16 people, 2 people per unit. That's 32 people taking left. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
You mentioned something new, and I'll just reiterate that we just listened to Attorney Durbin say, they're not asking for that much. They're moving a building closer to Route 1 and asking for a variance to do so without any justification why they can't put it closer to the back other than they wanted green space. You don't need a variance if you just leave the building where it's at. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to let you all know, the Board of Adjustment can refer projects to TAC for traffic review if we want to do that. I mean, this will not get a building permit without going for traffic review. So I don't know what they're going to ask them. Maybe there will be changes. Maybe you're going to have to put in a light. I don't know. But there might be remedies that we possibly haven't thought about. Yeah, I'm sorry, no. Okay. The public hearing is closed.
I just have one, I don't know if we should have questioned, I should have asked this question before the end of the public hearing, but just a question for city staff, if that's okay.
Of course.
So, I looked in the zoning ordinance for garden apartments, and it just said something about 10,000 square feet. How many units are allowed in garden apartments in the city?
So garden apartments, that's for the Gateway District, correct?
Okay.
There
are some garden apartments outside of the Gateway District, but pre-existing ones. Yeah, GAMH.
Okay. That's not something I'm familiar with, but if you give me a second, I can do some quick research.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's just what I said. We are going to take a 10-minute break. 7 minutes. We'll be back pretty soon. Okay, thank you.
We'll make staff work.
Okay, the meeting is back in order, and we were going to have a question answered from the city? Yes?
Yes. Well, you repeat your question.
I was wondering if, in garden apartments, if there were limits as to how many units you can have in a garden apartment throughout the city.
So we do have a dimensional requirement for garden apartments, but I don't think it's applicable again because it's a different type of housing in a different district. Does that make sense?
It does. It's the zoning that doesn't make sense.
Okay, where would you like to start?
I'm going to do something unusual and start by listening.
Well, someone's got to say something first. Okay, David. Mr. Ram.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try and summarize some of my thoughts on the project. Appreciate all the input that we've heard from both the applicants, many representatives, folks from the neighborhood. As was indicated, certainly I understand there's clearly passion about this project, and on both sides. Part of our job here as the zoning board adjustment is to try and separate that passion out, ideally as much as we can. It's not necessarily fully impossible to do, but sort of look at the series of facts and really balance those against the criteria by which we are judging this application. Understanding this application, this is just the first of many steps that it needs to go through. It will go through the technical advisory committee that is composed of city experts who take a look at things like traffic, may involve the traffic, the parking and traffic safety committee, which certainly is a great outlet for many of the concerns that we heard tonight from residents of the neighborhood. That is an excellent forum for, even if this project never gets built, that's a forum for many of the concerns that were brought forward, and in fact should be there if there is significant things that you're observing about traffic conditions in the neighborhood, on the road, getting in and out of specific properties, etc., illegal behaviors and whatnot. So what is the applicant asking for from us? They are asking for, I guess, first a variance for being able to put some parking in the secondary front lot. So this is a corner lot. It has two fronts to it. So one of its fronts is on Lafayette Road. The other front is on Hoover Drive. They are asking to put some parking on the Hoover Drive side. So why do we care about parking in the front of a structure that's on Lafayette Road? We put that in there because we're trying to change the nature of I was part of many of the discussions. We had a number of charrettes that were done years ago to try and do some imagining on what we thought Lafayette Road could be in the future, what our gateways could be in the future, and the things that we're hearing back from the participants overall, and some of the things that got incorporated into our zoning, including the gateway zoning, is this idea of pushing the buildings somewhat closer to the road and putting parking behind them. We don't want what we have now, which is typically a sea of asphalt, and if you look over it, you will see some kind of building in the distance that would be some kind of business. As been mentioned here, that may be an actual advantage to a business to have parking in front to create the illusion of to passersby of, hey, wow, that must be a place to be. It's got lots of cars in front of it. I'll go join everybody who's there. So we tried to change that dynamic, to create it more of a building forward, parking in the rear type of situation. So for these particular parking spots, are we in keeping with what was being attempted to be done by the zoning ordinance? My thought is that yes, at least in terms of that goal, understanding that there are other concerns related potentially to how it exits onto Hoover Drive, what its impacts might be to Hoover Drive. Those are all important considerations, but really not directly what this board takes a look at. We're really looking for what was the intent and goal of the zoning ordinance with regards to this. The Technical Advisory Committee and the Planning Board will certainly look at all those site conditions. They have the knowledge and expertise and the ability to really press down on those types of issues with regards to the parking and traffic safety aspects of the project. So I don't think that was a huge ask, at least in my mind. The other is I want to put my building somewhat closer to Lafayette Road than is allowed. So why, again, did we have this sort of requirement to push buildings back from Lafayette Road? I mean, I don't think it was exactly related to the plans for expansion, although certainly, as has been pointed out in the plan that is presented by the applicant, that shows their layout, they do recognize that there is a plan that the Department of Transportation for the state of New Hampshire reserves the right to at some point expand onto the property and take that as part of a plan for expansion of Lafayette Road, hopefully to maybe make traffic better, maybe make traffic worse, who knows, but that would be the concept at any rate. So I think the other aspect is so we have this balancing act of, yep, we want to push buildings forward and put parking in the rear, but we don't want to get them right on top of it. This isn't downtown. We're not going to have buildings that are crowding the street. There still needs to be a respectful distance. I think that requirement actually works better in the Gateway District, which is, first of all, those tend to be bigger lots, and the requirement that's being asked for here is probably not a big deal whatsoever. This sort of smaller lot shoved up against Lafayette Road, it does become a bigger issue, and that's why the applicant is asking for relief. Where they are proposing to place the building, is their reasoning for it sufficient that they really want to kind of create this back area that's probably green both for their tenants and for, I think there is some honesty to it being a respectful distance from the single-family homes that are nestled behind it. So in that sense, I think that's makes it is a usable argument for it. Is the 58 feet from the center line, dangerous in some way? If you look at it, it's currently 26 feet from the edge of the roadway, some distance back from Hoover Drive, probably about the same distance, 26-ish feet or so. If the road got widened, that would be reduced down by 12 feet, so you'd now be down to 14 feet. Is that sufficient to get sight lines around it? To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure. But I do think that's a great question for the Technical Advisory Committee and the Planning Board to take a look at. And the Planning Board may say, even if this board gave a variance and said, yep, we think 58 feet makes sense, again, based off of the objectives of the zoning ordinance, they could still say, yeah, no, from a Parking, Traffic, and Safety Committee, parking and traffic safety issue, you can't be that close. Got to move it back, take up some of that green space in the back, and then the applicant would have to make the decision whether or not that's something they want to do with their project. Again, that is something that is greater than the relief that we would provide if this board were to grant that relief. So they wouldn't need to necessarily come back to this board. I think the real crux of this is in the sort of the combined last two criteria that we've gone on about, which really is they want relief for the number of units on this lot. So part of it is they're really tied together. One is number of units. One is the density of lot area per dwelling unit. The two things are really tied together. Probably predominating is the lot area per dwelling unit. It's just simply to get that lot area per dwelling unit, they're going to go above the 8 units that is allowed by right at this location. That in and of itself by right, they are further restricted by the size of their lot to, as the applicant has put forward, 3 units if they were to fully comply with the 7,500 square feet per dwelling unit, which this zoning requires. So, the mass of the building, I know there's a little bit of talk about that. How big it's going to be. Again, the developer could go and create a building of the similar size, divide it into 3, and make 3 luxury townhomes out of it, and probably be in full compliance with the zoning ordinance, and could do that by right. I mean, basically, the building is not exceeding any of the required setbacks at this point for this for the zoning. It's all within that, so that is a potential thing, again, that the applicant could do if they did not want to do a business here, which again, has been pointed out, could also be a solution that may be the right solution for this property as well. So are we comfortable with extending that far from 3 units in essence to 16 units to go and allow that level of density on it with, as has been pointed out, some implications to traffic and the ability to get in and out of this proposed development? And those are all fair questions. Again, mostly things that are the purview of the planning board and the technical advisory committee, but I would not say now outside of what the zoning board can consider. We have considered some other similar projects in the past where we just said, look, even beyond the specifics of a traffic study, et cetera, we can just tell that this amount of intensity of use on this property is just simply too much. We can't allow it. That variance to take place. It's just beyond what was ever conceived for the zoning. So I think that's our fundamental question. I'm torn on it. We did allow 6 years ago now, really in a single residence district where the church had been, to create 48 units. A number of the folks who have come before us today from the Westerly are now living in some of those units. That was certainly a stretch when we did it back then, as has been pointed out. Probably not from a lot area per dwelling unit standpoint as much of a stretch as what is being asked for here by this applicant. So I think as a board, that's, in my mind, what we really need to wrestle with is, we're kind of sort of stretching that same concept that we allowed perhaps for the Westerly, another lot further up the road, further away from the Gateway District, and with that much more intensity, on a lot area per dwelling unit basis. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Ms. Marchison.
So I think, I think overall I probably agree with David's analysis that I think the lot area per dwelling unit is probably the thing that we most have to wrestle with. This is a very difficult application to analyze because the purpose of the mixed residential district, business district, is to provide a transition between residences and businesses, which of course we don't have here. I mean, we have the residences in the back, but there's no real businesses. And I do think the fact that the Westerly is right next to it with much higher density, much higher density, is something that perhaps makes this look a little bit less offensive. I think that Mr. Weinreb did a very good job about explaining why parking really can't go in the front for purposes of the retail on the bottom floor. So I think, it's, again, like the biggest things that we have to look at really in some ways are spirit and intent. Very difficult to divine what the spirit and intent of the zoning is right here, given that it's an island amidst single residence bay. And the purpose, the transition between the residents and the business. I think the fact that the Westerly is next door makes me, frankly, a little bit less concerned about the lot area per dwelling unit, given that there is so much more density there in the single residence B district. So that's, I just think it's a very difficult application to analyze on a lot of areas. So those are my thoughts.
Mr. Mattson.
Yeah, I'll just point out two things related to the two other board members who have commented so far. First of all, the Westerly, independent of the lot area per dwelling unit, the Westerly is 40-something units. So that in itself does generate a lot more traffic than however many units would be able to fit on this property. And related to that and David's comments are there's no variance being asked for the size of this building. The height and the building coverage are allowed. So you have this fixed amount of volume, and you can either fit fewer bigger units in it or more smaller units in it. And by the very nature of having more smaller units, they will cost less. But no matter what, this size building is allowed to be on this property. So that's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rossi, did you have?
I don't know. Did Mr. Mallon have something first?
I'll go. Thank you, the applicant. It's a great, well-presented application. Thank you for the neighbors who showed up. We also have letters of support from Elwyn Park as well. When I hear the guffawing in the crowd as far as the density issue, this is mixed residential B. It has, by right, they can do 8 units on this property. So instead of 16 750 square units, 2 bedrooms, which are good size apartments. They're not tiny houses. 750 square feet for a 2-bedroom is a good size 2-bedroom. Would you rather have 8 1,500 square foot apartments?
Well, this is
That
not
really
public hearing.
wasn't-
I wouldn't
Yeah.
direct you.
So, I mean, that's one thing. Or, you know, a 7-Eleven can go in there by right now. When you're looking at the comparison to the Westerly, this is different zoning. It's it's MRB. The Westerly is single residence B, which is 1 unit per half acre. Right now, you have 6 units per half acre. So, granted, traffic and safety, Hoover and McKinley are problematic, and they always have been. I don't think this project is going to make that big a difference to it. A convenience store would be a lot worse. I get the idea of moving it per, as Mr. Rayon mentioned, the gateway zoning, which is 1 lot away, where the buildings are pushed out front, so the parking be in the here. Right now, the parking here is all underneath. The first variance for me is problematic only because it's the corner lot. That's the only reason. It's not putting parking closer to the road. When I first read that, I'm like, putting parking closer in Lafayette? That's where the parking already is. No, it's the corner lot syndrome, and that's Hoover. I get that one. So that's not an issue for me. The project is very well designed. But it's the density issue that's probably hanging us all up. The center line issue, that's definitely a TAC issue. It's definitely a planning board issue. Taking into account that the DOT is, going to be widening the road. Given the map right now, that widening of the road, I don't know if it's going to come on, how much land is going to come on this side of Lafayette or the far side of Lafayette. If it's this side of Lafayette, I would suspect that the sidewalk in front of the Westerly is going too, because that lines up with the front green strip on this. So, I mean, is it a perfect project? No. Is it an instant denial? No. They're trying to be creative. And as Mr. Beckstead said earlier, I mean, when this first came up, my first reaction was, oh, it's the Chug-a-Lug. Now, for the people living in the Westerly, it used to be a package store, a liquor store. So that's where I am right now.
Mr. Rossi.
So maybe I think about it a little bit differently than some of the comments that have been made on the board so far. First of all, I don't buy into the argument that by approving a variance, we may be preventing a worse use of the property because the so-called worse use is allowed by right, and I don't think it's within our purview to try to circumvent the rights of property owners to use property as it's already designated in the Portsmouth zoning ordinance. So I really think that's a specious argument that we should not give much weight to, with all due respect, Paul. When I looked at this, I mean, my biggest concern, just close your eyes for a minute, think about Lafayette Road and the zoning map. Okay, in looking at the history of what's been going on here, and I thank you, David, for lending me your printout of the zoning map.
Old school.
Yeah, what's happening, if you turn this last 10 years into a time-lapse photograph of what's happening along Lafayette Road in this area, we have the Gateway District, which this project would fit perfectly into, and might even be eligible for some incentives for workforce housing, which I'm going to come back to. Don't shake your head no until I come back to it. But this not in the Gateway District. So what I see happening, or has happened in the last couple of frames of that time-lapse image, is that you had the Westerly approved. As Attorney Durbin stated, part of the rationale for that approval was, it's adjacent to the Gateway District, so what's the difference? It's SRB, but, it really should be Gateway. It's right there. It's not going to change the character of the neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That brings you right up to Hoover Road. Okay. Now you get to the next property, and it's like, it's adjacent to the Waverly, and that's a very high-density development, this next frame is going to be, you have essentially a de facto extension of the Gateway District without some of the benefits extended to the developers that could be extended if the Gateway District were actually intended to extend into this area. And that's that's the current frame we're looking at. What's the next frame? You have the next property owner up in, at the next adjacent property saying, this is a great idea. I wonder why. And now that we're, will the next argument be, will the next frame be, this corner lot here by Hoover has this density. Maybe SRB, these 2 lots or 3 lots should have similar density. And I could see this going in a domino sequence all the way to the Cumberland Farms. There's nothing stopping it. So in my mind, Hoover Road is the Rubicon. It's right now, it's the kind of the natural edge of the de facto gateway zoning that's been extended that far. And I don't think it's in the interest of the city or the residents to continue to extend it beyond. So I don't like that time-lapse image, and I think we should put a stop to it at the line of demarcation of Hoover Road. That's what I'm thinking. And I'm also coming back to the workforce housing. I didn't get that idea of affordable housing from a newspaper article. In fact, I never read the news article that people were referring to. I got it from the words of Attorney Durbin. The immediate intent behind the construction of the building is to create housing for employees of the Labrie business. Hence, the units are designed to be affordable in the context of the Portsmouth housing market. Okay, it doesn't say in the definition of the Portsmouth zoning ordinance. That's true. However, it did kind of get me into a more favorable frame of mind because I thought, hey, here's a creative solution. They're not asking taxpayers for money to buy some property and build some workforce housing. They need their workers to have an affordable place to live. It's reasonable. However, upon questioning and discussion, what we learned was that there's no intention to make this what we would consider to be, what the city would consider to be workforce housing. And furthermore, it was stated during the discussion that it's unlikely that the employees of the Labrie businesses would be able to afford to live in these units. So I'm confused as to why this was even in part of the rationale for the proposal. So in my mind, these things all weigh against approving the variance as submitted. Those are my thoughts.
Okay. I see the time-lapse photograph of Lafayette Road a little differently. It seems to me, going south, that there are many, many houses that look like this. A little taller, rental, condo, but a lot of it has become 3 or 4-story housing along that corridor. Some of them needed approvals, variances from us, some didn't. So I wasn't going north. But for me, this goes with what's happening along that road. And it's a great-looking project. And it's probably necessary. I know it's not affordable because even 750 square feet just isn't affordable by what any of us used to remember or think. I just don't see a hardship. I just am having trouble seeing the hardship. And this is one of those times that I would like this to work, but sitting here, I don't see how I can support this. So that's where I am, and maybe it's time for a motion. Yes.
Before that, just a couple of precautions back to some of what's been said by some of the other board members. One, just be careful of the term density. I would agree with what has been said by abutters that the density of this proposal is greater than the density of what was done at the Westerly. That said, the Westerly certainly has bigger structures. It has more units, probably is more imposing from a traffic standpoint, but from a lot area per dwelling unit standpoint, this is a higher density ask. I would also be careful with saying that 8 units is allowed by right. 8 units is not allowed by right. 3 units is allowed by right. If you combine the allowable square footage per dwelling unit with is far less than what the 8 would be allowed if this was sitting on a bigger combined lot. So really, ultimately, 3 or some type of business is what it can be. I do agree with Mr. Rossi in that, what it could be really isn't our primary concern. I brought it up primarily to indicate that, there's some thoughts that, 16 units is creating this big building. 16 units is not creating the big building. The big building is certainly allowed. It could be up to 3 units and still be in a big building. I just wanted to make that distinction that the size of the building isn't being driven by the 16 units. And then coming to the last question about affordability, and again, not directly a purview of this board. I know it certainly was brought up in some of the discussions back and forth. Sadly, even under the statute and how our city ordinance tries to go and interpret the statute, the term affordable is not what you would think it would be. It is based on the median costs of a specific area, and for the seacoast of New Hampshire, that still ends up being a pretty darned expensive apartment that maybe some of our workers can or cannot afford. And then the other part is I don't think that the applicant ever represented that they didn't feel that their employees could not afford to live there. It's that they weren't entirely sure if they would be all interested in living there, i.e. they certainly have many other housing options. Some of them may have families. Some of them may already have a good situation. Some of them may live at home, right? Which is a common refrain with the younger folks is I just haven't left home yet. They just may not be able to fill it all. I don't think it was necessarily a correlation of our employees couldn't afford to live here.
Thank you. Mr.
Yeah, I have a question for procedural reason or a procedural question. Could we approve some of the variances, but not all of them? And can you make more than one motion before, so if the first motion fails, before concluding this application and moving on to the next case, can another motion be made?
Yes.
Okay.
You may.
Okay.
Yes, both of those. You may break it into parts, and yes.
Okay.
So I just want to add on too. So, we often get these arguments in front of us as the ZBA. We are not a housing policy board. We cannot solve the city's housing crisis. That is way outside of our expertise or our purview. So, not that I'm not, and I'm sure other members of the board are not, sympathetic to the housing crunch in the city. It is just not something that we can solve. So.
Okay. So a motion, somebody?
I move to deny the application.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a second.
Oh, no, I have.
Okay, Mr. Rossi.
I think that granting the application would not be consistent and would not observe the spirit of the ordinance. If we take that to mean that it would alter the essential characteristics of the neighborhood. This is really surrounded by SRB neighborhood, and this is not an SRB type dwelling. It's not even an MR. Sorry, did I say SR? It is SRB.
It's MRB.
It is an MRB. It doesn't even comport with the spirit of what MRB is about, because it does not have a business component. So it's really not the intended use within MRB. So I do not think that this proposal comports with the spirit of the ordinance. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to address all the other failures.
Okay. It only needs to fail on one point for anybody here. Okay. Does the second have anything to add?
I would just add that I just don't see the hardship.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's, in my opinion, been, no hardship presented, particularly with regard to the need for 16 units as opposed to 8, or to the low square footage per unit, as compared to the ordinance.
Before we vote, does anybody have anything to add? Okay, just
Sorry.
No, that's good.
Okay.
Mr.
Yeah, so I guess aside from the 16 unit thing, and for hardship, the applicant must establish that the property is burdened by the zone and restriction in a manner that is distinct from other similarly situated property. This is essentially spot zoned, but because we didn't make it MRB, it already is MRB, but it's surrounded all by different zoning that is a unique conditions of this property that is a restriction from other similarly situated property. Yeah.
Mr. Ram.
I'm going to reluctantly support the motion. I think this project has a lot going for it. The spirit of the ordinance is one aspect. I just am still struggling with trying, in my mind, to come up with a verbiage that I could say that the hardship directly next to it that really ties into what is being asked for. If they could say, hey, we're uniquely zoned, but right is that this board previously granted some relief to the Westerly. Again, we did that because it was, I think you could make an argument, it was right up against, and the argument that was made, it was right up against the gateway. It was an exceptionally large lot for that area. The intensity, and even though it was 48 units, we also kind of said, well, it was previously a house of worship. You had, a lot of traffic pulsing and whatnot. It's not going to, it's probably going to be less intense than that. So from just an overall intensity standpoint, the 48 units we could live with those kind of considerations of being right adjacent to the gateway and having sort of that new use, and the fact that I do recall a big part of convincing the board was that, hey, look, the impact on the single residence B that surrounds it is going to be minimal, in part because we have this way of really funneling the traffic in a different direction. And again, like I said, traffic is really the planning board's and tax purview, but it is ours in a sense of intensity. And I just do think that what's being asked for this particular lot, being that much further up the road, away from what is the gateway, and the fact that it's such a big ask relative to what is allowed on this, quite a bit smaller parcel than that exceptionally large parcel that was next to it, I think is just going beyond what this board can approve. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other remedies, and certainly, in the future, I know the current city council is working on trying to relook at some zoning to try and encourage this type of housing. Whether this parcel would be affected or not is a good question. It might not. But there are future ways, and done legislatively rather than through our judicial approach, to go and say, yes, this is something that we think is correct for this corner lot. I just think it's a little too far of a reach for what this board can go and say and tie to the criteria that we are bound to by the state.
Okay. The motion is to deny. A yes vote denies the project. Ms. Record?
Yes.
Mr. Mannel?
Yes.
Ms. Margison?
No.
Mr. Ram?
Yes.
Mr. Rossi?
Yes.
Mr. Mattson?
No.
And the chair votes yes, so you are denied. Not really called for.
Oh,
No winners.
so now I can't make a motion on like approving some of them, or
You can.
I can. So
You
okay.
can.
Even though, but it was just denied.
Can he make a motion to approve?
No, you had to make it first.
I think
was
I
a global
denied,
motion.
I
You
denied
would have
every
had to
aspect.
go first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would have had to ask for a.
I'm sorry, I thought you would have had to go first.
I thought you were going to make a motion right
Right
away.
then.
Okay. Wait. Okay.
It won't matter, Jeff.
Sorry.
They're going to redesign it.
Yeah.
I thought he was going to make it after.
Yeah.
No, but they could not have to come back. Anyway, it's okay.
Yeah, you would have had to make an amendment to the motion.
Okay.
Or have done yours first when you asked.
Okay.
So I'm sorry if
It's
I
all right.
misled you.
I was still sorting it out.
I'm sorry if
Oh,
I
no, it
misled
was
you.
fine.
Okay. So,
That was a hard one.
yeah. Okay, so
I ultimately went because the zoning made no sense.
should we have a person?
I
Probably
think they're
gave up.
making their way up.
Oh,
No, there's people right here.
okay. So
Okay, so
the,
30 Park Street is gone, but there's
Yeah.
one more.
the next item of business is the request of Creeley Family Trust, Sean Creeley and Andrea Creeley, trustees, for property located at 337 Richards Avenue, whereas relief is needed to demolish the existing detached garage and construct an addition and attached garage to the primary structure, which requires a variance from section 10.521 to allow a 1.5-foot rear yard where 20 is required. Said property is located on Assessor Map 130, Lot 2, and lies within the General Residence A District.
Thank you, Madam
Hello.
Chairman, members of the board. Hello again. For the record, Derek Durbin. I'm here on behalf of the owner applicant for the property, Sean Creeley. Sean is here with me tonight. There's not too many people left in the room. Maybe that's a good thing for us after the last application. I also have Jen Ramsey here as well, who's our designer for the project. Happy to answer any questions if they come up that I can't relate it to the design or what's proposed. So the property at 337 Richards Avenue is a corner lot, as you can see from the plans. It's situated at the intersection of Richards and Lincoln Avenue. The property does contain a rather narrow two-story single-family home built around 1900 that the Creeley family resides in. It's Sean, his wife, and 2 children. The property itself is just about a 1/4 acre in size. It makes it, as you see on the tax map, one of the larger properties in the surrounding area. And I did a little research of the properties that are of similar size in the surrounding area. Most, if not all of those, have more than one dwelling unit on them. So the Creeley property is truly an outlier for the neighborhood. While the property does have a Richards Avenue address, the Creeley's driveway is actually located off of Lincoln Avenue. That is also the side of the property that they use as the primary access to their home, as you can probably also see from the plans. There is a detached garage at the end of the driveway. That detached garage is situated just slightly over a foot off of the what is considered to be the rear property boundary. The garage is in relatively poor condition. It is too small to fit a modern vehicle. Therefore, the Creeleys right now, they just use it to store outdoor belongings, bikes. I think some lawn furniture is what I saw in there as well, children's stuff. So the Creeley's plan is to actually demolish that existing garage, create a 2-car garage in its place with living space, a bedroom above it. That would tie into an addition they're proposing for their home. It's a mudroom, living room addition on that side of the house. So it would tie directly into that, whereas obviously the existing garage is detached. The home, as it is right now, is 20 and a half feet wide, side to side. Looks larger on the outside, as I pointed out in my narrative, due to the Tourette design element, which I had to learn what that term meant from Jen Ramsey, but it's essentially that tower sort of feature on the home, as well as some of the other exterior detailing, including the wraparound porch. The living space itself, though, is compartmentalized inside the house into rooms that are quite small. The bedrooms are 9 by 12, kitchen's 11 by 9, dining room's 11 by 10, the living room's essentially 14 by 12. There is no true primary or master bedroom to the house. They're all just smaller bedrooms right now. So as part of the proposed improvements, the Creelys, as I mentioned, would like to demolish the existing garage, also a stone patio, impervious stone patio that is located just off of their driveway, which is part of the access to their house, as well as a chicken coop behind the detached garage. The garage addition would be slightly taller than the existing, well, not slightly, but it will be 8 feet taller than the existing structure in order to accommodate the proposed bedroom above. The existing garage is 10.2 feet in height, while the new garage would be 18.3 feet in height. The new garage would be slightly more conforming with respect to the rear yard setback than the existing one. The most impacted abutter, Anthony Races, who owns the property at 192 Lincoln Avenue, has issued a letter of support to the board, wasn't conditional in any respect, and wholly supports the what is being proposed before you. You should have also received a letter from Margaret Hodges. I have copies if the board doesn't have that in their packet. You do have that. Okay, thank you. So with that being said, I'm happy, I know it's a late hour, I'll just move directly through the variance criteria if that's okay. Granting the variance will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance or the public interest. There are numerous examples of similar setback encroachments throughout the south end of Portsmouth. And in this particular area, where most of the properties and the structures predate modern or current zoning regulations, the proposed garage is intended and will align stylistically with the existing home and the other proposed improvements. It is at the minimum height and width necessary to accommodate 2 vehicles and a reasonably sized bedroom above. The proposed garage will be angled away from the abutting property at 1 Lincoln Avenue. That will result, as I had mentioned, in a slight improvement in the rear yard setback. It will be 1.7 feet from the rear yard boundary at its closest point and 3.6 at its furthest. Its furthest point right now is 2.6 feet. Any impact upon the light, air, and space of the property at 192 Lincoln Avenue beyond what exists would be minimal. Particularly when you consider the fact that the area adjacent on the abutting property is to the proposed garage is a 17 to 19 foot wide driveway. It's not usable yard area, patio area. It's not part of the, there's no structure within that area either. The Creelys do have a large maple tree that's situated immediately behind the existing garage that the abutter has actually asked them to keep. Interestingly, that actually has a greater impact on their light, air, and space than, given its size, than would the proposed garage. The idea of it locating the garage addition to the other side of the property on Richards Avenue was looked at. It was deemed infeasible just as a result of how this home is situated on the lot, how it's laid out, and also where the existing driveway access is. It would have required abandonment of the existing driveway access and approval from the Public Works Department for a new driveway on Richards Avenue, which is never a guarantee. But more importantly, I think it was highly disfavored by the neighbors who the Creelys approached in advance of filing their application, who felt that it would negatively alter the streetscape in this area of Richards Avenue. I should also just point out very briefly that even if it had been feasible, that there's nothing to prevent the Creelys from keeping the existing non-conforming garage as additional storage space, given what's proposed. So for all the reasons I've articulated, granting the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood, would be within the public interest, certainly wouldn't alter public safety or welfare in any negative sense. The only potentially impacted abutter wholly supports the plans for the addition. I think that is also, I think, evidence that surrounding property values will not be diminished, as well as garage and patio just existing there already. Architecturally, as I said, it will tie in with the addition that they can do by right on the home, and it just generally makes sense for the property and the needs of their family. Literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. The property does have several conditions that distinguish it from surrounding properties, one being that it's a large corner lot developed before current zoning with an existing garage that's non-conforming and has been in its existing location for as long as anybody there can remember. What's proposed will be slightly more conforming with respect to the setback, and denying the variance would do nothing to actually remedy the existing nonconformity. The proposed garage will also occupy an area that's already occupied by the existing garage, but also a patio area and to some extent the chicken coop. That is the primary access to the home, as I pointed out, and trying to move the garage to the other side, really not a feasible option for the property and would have a more detrimental impact to abutters and the general public than locating it where it's proposed. So finally, proposed use is a reasonable one. It's already an existing use of property. It's one that's permitted by right in the GRA zoning district. So for these reasons, I hope that you'll support the request that's before you tonight. Happy to answer any questions. And I know Jen's happy to answer any design-related questions as well that you might have.
So just a couple of questions. I just want to make sure I have everything straight. So the picture, it's 132 of our package. I don't know what it is on your submission.
I know, it's tough when it's
I know.
like numbered
It's like
that
a
way.
bait stamp thing.
I don't date that yet, and
So-
I don't dare mess with that, which is why I don't actually
So
try
it's the left side yard view of property and garage Lincoln Avenue, and you can see the side of the house and the driveway and the garage. So the addition is going to be taking up that space.
So yes, the addition will be taking up the space presently occupied by that stone patio, as well as where the existing garage is. And I was actually incorrect. I said that I thought it overlapped with somewhere where the chicken coop would be. It does not. It's just the existing garage and then the, for lack of better words, paved.
So it's more towards the yard.
Paved patio access.
Okay.
Yes, it's angled in towards, yes, the usable yard area.
Okay, and then this is another issue, we had an application like this early in the evening where the garage is right on that property line.
Yep.
That is a paved driveway for the abutting property on the other side.
Yes, that's correct, and that driveway actually slightly encroaches onto our property closer to the street.
Okay.
Yes, that is 17 to 19 foot wide, which I think I had them mark the dimension on the plan, but it's, I guess 19.2 foot wide, if I can read that properly, driveway that extends back almost to the extent of where the existing garage is. Our garage will be angled and pushed in a little more from the back side of the existing garage.
Okay, so just one last question. So so if you did push the garage in so that it was conforming, you would have some overlap with the driveway. The driveway would probably still match up with the driveway of the abutting property.
I'm sorry, Beth, could you ask me that again?
So if you did push the garage in, towards the house, towards Richards Avenue, the strip that you would have next to the abutting driveway would be just like side yard, basically.
Well, that's a kind of a difficult question to answer because it would, if I understand what you're asking, is that the driveway would then extend back further, so it wouldn't be usable side yard. If you're saying if you can move it back farther and into the usable yard area, and then basically you would drive in off of Lincoln Avenue, take a right into it, is that kind of what you're?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would then increase, vastly increase the size of the paved driveway area, so it wouldn't be usable space, and essentially you'd be replacing impervious surface with impervious surface, but then that would eliminate any potential for the mudroom, living room area that they're proposing that is intended to tie in with the garage addition.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mr. Ram?
Yeah, just trying to understand, and I agree it's a relatively small square footage house. Looking at page 124, it's your BOA plan 1 of 1. Your proposed addition is occupying 1,380 square feet of gross area. What is the current gross area, not like multi-story, but on a single floor for the existing wood frame structure?
Yeah.
It's not on that drawing.
That's a fair and good question. I do not have that figure, but perhaps Jen does. I did have that figure at one point written down somewhere. Let's see if I can find it in my notes.
I mean,
Yeah, so it's probably about
By half that.
11.
Yeah.
1100.
Sorry, I didn't mean it to be a stump the chump.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, we don't have an exact number, so this is going to be
That's fine.
approximate. It's approximately 1,100 square feet is what we're coming up with.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the proposed addition is occupying probably about 600 square feet more, well, it's basically doubling and then some, the total square footage. And sort of going to page 114, which is really the staff memo, and just really sort of quickly looking at the aerial map that's shown there, I guess I'm bewildered at the comments that you've been making, because your client could easily, there's a huge open space, certainly far more than any of the other homes in the neighborhood have, off, when you're facing from Richards Ave, off to the right-hand side, southerly direction. But your claim is that putting a driveway there is somehow different than the rest of the neighborhood. And I'm struggling to see that based off of what I know about the neighborhood, and it certainly is captured here in this image, where it's like driveway. Why is one more driveway in that area somehow not in keeping with the neighborhood?
You're talking about a driveway off of Richards Avenue.
Correct.
Yeah, so there's a multitude of reasons why that doesn't work, but one reason is, which is not the functional reasons, I guess, are that they actually did their due diligence and presented the plans to all the neighbors, and the neighbors really disfavored putting a driveway over there. Now, in terms of the architectural and design reasons for doing that, those are obviously different set of concerns. The other thing is, and I'll let Jen speak to that, but just from a practical standpoint as well, you have your primary access already off of Lincoln Avenue. Yes, they could probably still continue to keep something there. I'm not sure if DPW lets them, without a variance from this board, have two driveways, but there's nothing to prevent them from keeping what's essentially on the lot, including the existing garage, and putting something over there, which does really nothing to improve the conditions of the property. But I'll let Jen speak to some of the issues of trying to tie in a garage on that side of the property with the existing structure.
Jennifer Ramsey with Soma Studios on behalf of the applicant. One more thing I will mention, though, regarding traffic and safety is we've all driven Richards, and I do it myself, and I shake my head that I've turned on that road. It almost operates as a one-way street when cars are parked on both sides, and you have to pull over to let someone else go. I think that's one of the concerns with adding another garage is that the natural flow of that street is really toggled down quite tightly already. So having another home with 2 or 4 cars backing out onto that street or trying to back into their driveway to make a healthy exit forward is just more congestion on an already congested street. So some of the beauty of these side streets and with the corner property specifically is that people get used to, the kids know that you're going to be pulling out here. So like riding your bikes and all the activity is safer when you don't change what people have become used to. So there's a benefit to keeping activity where activity is known to happen, and then also the street width itself. But in terms of the architecture, we are adding on a sizable addition with a nice 2-car garage and living room, but we're also trying to keep some of the attributes of the home the way it currently works, which means where we've added it on is currently where the owners enter the home. It's already where a mudroom exists. It's where the kitchen exists, and you want to enter a home and be able to bring your groceries from your garage right to the kitchen counter. So there's some flow and functionality attributes that we're trying to make work here. Similarly, if we came off of Richards and we had the garage now facing that street and the primary bedroom above, the second floor would also be challenged considerably. We'd probably lose a bedroom to make that connection through. So we're trying to work with quite a bit of what's there and then just make it a more functional home for a family.
Okay. Sorry, it's taken a while for the iPad here to reconfigure itself. So your floor plan, which is a little further down here, looking at our sheet 128, it's, again, just proposed plans. There's no number on it for your sheet. But as your client has indicated, the existing garage might be a 1-car garage. Realistically isn't. They're using it more for storage, I believe is what they were indicating. So they are looking at a 2-car garage here. We're asking for 1.5 feet where 20 feet is required, admittedly because this is a rear yard. It's a pretty a larger, if it was a side yard, it'd be 10 feet. But still, no matter what, 1.5 feet is pretty tight to the property line. Was there any discussion about just keeping it as a 1-car garage and sort of reconfiguring things so that you can continue to have a bedroom and maybe expand out again into that portion of the lot that is perfectly allowed under our zoning to expand out into, that you're really not fully taking advantage of?
We've actually been working on this project for almost 6 years. We've looked at a lot of different versions. We've looked at versions where it was a 1-car garage, with the second bay was a proper mudroom. We've looked at the 2 cars with no mudroom entrance off of the side street. And this is a family of 4, and animals and life and things are happening here. And so, this isn't a huge 2-car garage. So being able to put 2 cars in there, they're going to have teenagers soon. There'll be another 1 or 2 cars potentially. I think currently the Creelys park one of their cars on the street because they only have the driveway and no garage. So I think from a functional standpoint, they opted for 2 cars, a very narrow mudroom space, so they still have a mudroom and a powder room off that area, and a proper bedroom above. I think other alternatives, there would have been some other concessions to how they live in this home. And I think what's been mentioned before, it's an oddly narrow home as it exists. It's only 20 feet wide, essentially. So the perception of the space they have compared to the space they're going to have, it doesn't work really well currently. So we want this to flow and feel more like a proper family home. And if they, moved the garage and you came off of the side street and you swung a garage around, you basically obliterate the entire sunny side of their play yard. You impact shade to other neighbors. We may keep that tree still, but now we've changed the orientation of what the neighbor's parking lot, how it is facing their yards. You've changed a lot of the dynamic of the neighborhood and the space, light, and privacy that people already feel they have. It would be a tremendous change to how people use that space and their sensibility of privacy and barriers and boundaries and edges.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Further questions for the applicant? Thank you. Do you want to come up again, Attorney German? No?
I did want to just answer to one potential concern, and it may or may not have been contained in the letter of support you got from the impacted abutter at 192 Lincoln. avenue, but they have discussed basically the granting of an easement for maintenance and that type of, to address any concern that, oh, okay, that's tight, how are you going to be able to maintain that? Again, I just reiterate to the board is that, that is a large swath of driveway on the neighboring property, which I think is unique in a sense, just how it abuts right up against this. And the portion of the addition along the property line, it's not becoming that much longer. It is going to be angled slightly more in away from the abutting property, but it really, from a lengthwise perspective, it's only a couple more feet in length along that boundary. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you.
One question.
Yes.
Attorney
Mr.
Durbin,
Rossi.
this is just so I'm absolutely sure. The abutter support comes from that White House that has the driveway that's right up against the garage, the existing garage, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, 192 Lincoln Avenue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to do this. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this petition? Is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this petition? Is there anyone who would like to speak to, for, or against? Public hearing is closed. And it's been a hard night.
I can't twice in a row start by listening. So
No,
I
go
think,
ahead.
I think the variance that's being asked here is small. It's basically not changing the degree of nonconformance of the lot. Granted that the massing along that border is going to be significantly different, but when I was walking around the area, it's kind of as it sits right now. It kind of looks a little bit out of place, but being too small of a house, there's a lot of big massing around it. So I don't think that this change will affect the character of the neighborhood. And with the abutter who's most directly affected being in support, I'm really not concerned about the massing along that property line. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Are you saying something?
Yes, I will not be supporting this application for the same reasons that Mr. Rossi is. I see the increase of the massing, and I don't really see the hardship for having the two-car garage. I think that you're increasing massing at a point that is really close to that right yard. I realize it's pre-existing, however, it just seems like it is in some ways increasing the massing. So I will not be supportive of it.
Mr. Ram.
Yeah, I'm with Ms. Margison on this one, as I was on the application that we had earlier this evening. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of this. I agree, this is a relatively small house. Looks much larger than it is. It's got a huge wraparound porch. It's actually a very beautiful house. I wish the homeowners well with it, and regardless of what happens tonight. I just feel that, they're more than allowed to add a lot to the mass of this house. They actually have a huge lot. They're just heading in the direction that goes and violates our zoning ordinance when they have other directions that they could go in. Or I could be persuaded that, the 20 feet is too much, but I could live with like a 10-foot setback, because if it was a right side yard, which you could perceive it as such, really with the garage facing Lincoln the way it does, you could say, hey, 10 feet is what it would be if it was a side yard. I'm asking for, half the relief. I could live with that. 1.5 feet, you're essentially going from what's been, identified as sort of a large shed to a pretty massive 2-car with a full-size bedroom up above it. And I think there's other solutions here. I appreciate that the applicant has spent a lot of time, effort, and money in coming up with this particular one, but at the same point in time, I think that I can't find a hardship with, there's so many other ways to get the same thing. Why is it that's what's unique about this property that says that they have to go in this direction, other than there was a very old outdated garage over in this corner that, you know, they're asking to be much larger than that in my mind. So I can't support approving it.
Anybody else? A motion? I am really torn on this. The ask is very small, but the change to the property is enormous. And I guess I'm having a hard time with that. And, but my instinct now is to say that the request for the variance is small and that I will approve it, although it makes me very sad to see this house change at all. But I have a different duty up here, so.
I'll make one other comment, and that is with regard to the public interest. I know this is kind of one of my favorite hobby horses, but I think that modernizing these homes, as beautiful as they are, to meet the needs, the contemporary needs of a family, is a strong mandate within the public interest, and I do generally support that idea, and I think it's in play here.
Thank you.
I think that I will disagree with that because the public interest is not what is good for a young family. Or updating the housing stock. It's the spirit and intent of the ordinance, which is, in this case, to allow for light and air and to allow proper setbacks from yards. So that is really what the public interest is, the spirit and intent of the ordinance provision.
Mr. Mantle?
It is a pretty house. It's a very small house on a huge lot that's set as far back from Richards as possible to about the other property. That being said, as far as the notion for a driveway on Richards, that's not up to us. That would be something the city would have to grant and not any of us. That's a curb cut. Trust me, I've tried. And if the city doesn't want to grant it for whatever reason, there's nothing you can do about it other than take them to Superior Court, I guess. And that side of the yard is big. I get it. But just like we saw a couple applications, a couple of meetings ago, about somebody wanting to put a garage right on the property line, and the house next door has a garage, but they drove the driveway to the back of the house, and that's where they put the garage and didn't need any zoning. And this, as David said earlier, that there are ways to get this done and still have a two-car garage and still have a huge side yard, but you would eliminate, you'd have a long driveway into the back, and the addition could go in that direction. And it would work just fine as far as the modern living and all those aspects as well. So in this application, as much as, I can't see the hardship. I'd love to,
I know.
but I can't see it.
Okay. Is there a motion? Could we please have a motion?
I'll start off just for I'll make a motion for discussion or for a vote, and we'll see what happens. Based off of my discussion, I would move to deny the application.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
As we know, you only need to fail on one of the criteria to not allow to be granted. I think the biggest issue is what is unique about this property that prevents its adequate use by the applicant in any other way. I'm just not seeing that that there is a hardship sufficient to warrant the level of relief that's being asked for. And I state that carefully because I'm not saying that there isn't room for some relief here. I do think that the property is burdened unusually with a particularly large rear setback, but I think asking for 1.5 feet off the property line for a pretty substantial height of building, and really the only justification that I've heard from the applicant's representatives is there's an existing structure there. I'm not going to be any worse off than that existing structure, other than the massing and size of what you're proposing to put there is much, much larger, and that there are other potential relief valves within the property itself. They are not approaching anywhere close to the amount of total coverage that they could have. I have nothing wrong with them making improvements to this house, making it much larger. They bought a great lot for doing that, other than what they're proposing is kind of going in the one direction that the zoning ordinance doesn't allow you to go and accomplish that objective. And so in that sense, I just don't think it's meeting the hardship criteria. And I would also say that granting the spirit of the ordinance is light and air relative to other properties. I think the 1.5 feet, again, compared to 20 feet, which is required, is just too far for the spirit of the ordinance. So with that, I recommend denial.
Do you have anything to add?
I will go with what Mr. Williams said.
Is there any further discussion? Okay. So the motion's to deny. A yes vote is to deny. Ms. Record?
No.
Mr.
Yes.
Merrill? Ms. Margison?
Yes.
Mr. Rayum?
Yes.
Mr. Rossi?
No.
Mr. Mattson?
Yes.
And I vote no. So, you are
3
denied.
or 3.
The motion passes 4-3.
Yep, the motion passes 4-3. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
May I make a motion to adjourn, or is it too
May.
early? You guys want to stay up later?
Second.
All in favor? Anybody want to?
Aye.
Aye.